What's up, everybody? Electric Church podcast. I guess that's what we're calling this damn thing. Yeah. Today we're getting right into it. Going to be talking about RORSCHACH, specifically their Protestant record, which came out in 1992, I believe. Correct?
92, 93, something like that, yeah.
First off, though, I think we're going to introduce everybody. Being that this is the first episode, we should probably tell you who the fuck we are and why the fuck we are qualified to talk about this or not qualified. So, who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'll get it rolling.
Do it. Perfect.
All right. So, my name is John Anthony. I started getting involved in kind of punk rock and hardcore when I was about 10 years old, so in the 90s. Through my sister and my uncle, and I thought it was something that I would kind of give up on as I got older, but I am pushing almost 40 years old at this point, and I'm still here. I've made these choices in my life, and I do not fucking regret them. Yeah, we're going to be talking about, I guess, Protestant by RORSCHACH, for sure, for our first episode of Electric Church, and I'm going to pass this over to Jason.
All right, I'm Jason, and I've really got into stuff. I don't know, not really like around the same time as you, Anthony, but I remember, I think it was in 5th grade, I went over to my cousin's house. One week he was like, yo, we're goth, and then the next week he was like, goth isn't real, we're punk.
Goth is a figment of your imagination.
That was it, and then it was just fucking off running from there, and it's never fucking stopped.
My name is Pat, aka Biker Witch. I am a tattoo artist, but I've been obsessed with music forever, pretty much all types. I listen to everything, but predominantly came up, grew up in the hardcore scene in mid-2000s kind of era, even though I was pretty much obsessed with 90s metalcore, particularly the weird stuff, the exact era we're talking about. So this stuff is very close to my heart. Yeah, so I'm mostly a art and tattooing guy, but again, been chronically, autistically obsessed with music since a very, very young age. So, yeah, really excited to talk about this record.
Hell yeah. All right, let's get into it.
Which leads us to, why did we choose this record? And I think I just touched on that a little bit. I think that this record really, in a lot of ways, encompasses early on in this era, going into this kind of weirder side of the 90s in metallic hardcore, and is a super influential, though like often overlooked record, I think, for even people who are into quote-unquote hardcore and metalcore. So I think also being the tastes of the people at this table, it makes sense. This is like a common thread, I think, for everybody here. In the future, we might cover records that maybe like two of us or one of us is like more familiar with than the other.
Absolutely.
We might do more stuff where all three of us, maybe we'll even jump into something where the three of us know it's like a record worth covering, but we're not super, super immersed in it. We're pretty much open to anything, and if anybody out there has something they would love to hear our take on, again, even if all three of us aren't aware of it, but we think it's worth covering, like, we're totally open to it. But this seemed like a really good jumping off place, something that we both have, all three of us have good experience with, could totally use to revisit, probably learn a little bit more about, and would be something that we would gladly talk about and get really excited about and hopefully turn some people onto.
For sure. I thought it was actually really interesting. I couldn't get this out of my head once I started thinking about it today when I was driving on my way here. So we all kind of grew up around the early 2000s, right?
Yeah.
So as far as like kind of hardcore and punk goes, that's like dead center middle-aged. That's dead center middle-aged for hardcore.
Kind of a weird time, too.
Since it's like, we're in 2022 now, and you figure like, you could argue hardcore kind of started in the late 70s. So we'll round that up to the 80s, right? So we're like dead center.
First Bad Brains record, I think, is 78 or 79. So, I mean, that makes sense.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. So, like, we're like this mid-generation, like, kind of like talking about, like, I guess kind of like hardcore and, metalcore and punk and whatnot. And I think this will be really, really interesting.
And not for nothing, I think a lot of old guys would probably see the era that we grew up in as kind of the tipping point for when it goes bad.
That's always been the case, though. That's always been the case, and I will say that because because guys from the '80s hated all the hardcore from the '90s. They saw something like Earthchrist, they're like, "What's this new school shit?"
Yeah, exactly.
But that's like some of my favorite era of hardcore is like the '90s, even though that was an era that I missed by like a hair, kind of.
And for better or for worse, you know, like I think I'm a little bit younger than you are, but like I came up when I first started going to shows and really checking out hardcore shows, it was like the peak of like bands like Unbroken Wings,
Sure,
and Norma Jean, like on their like Memphis Will Be Laid to Waste, Bless the Martyr, Kiss the Child era.
A lot of that stuff is like gospel now, no pun intended.
Yeah, but it was kind of controversial at the time, you know.
Yeah, but like it's wild because a lot of the kids that are coming up now that I see like in their
they think that stuff
20s.
was always loved.
Yeah,
and like I still
but it
am
wasn't.
on the fence about that.
Yeah,
stuff.
I mean, I've come to have more of an open mind about it, like kind of these days and stuff like that. But like, yeah, I mean, back then that stuff was, I mean, it was popular in its own right, but there was a heavy critique of a lot of that stuff.
Now, no one would think twice about calling any of that stuff hardcore. You know, where like before.
There was a clear divide.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah,
like,
I remember distinctly it was hardcore shows and metalcore shows.
Yeah,
I mean, it was the difference
100%.
between Hellfest, which, you know, is for anyone who doesn't know, is a hardcore festival that started in the 90s. Went on till about, I'm going to say 2004, because 2005 was a shit show, and it ended up getting canceled. The dude, like, took off with all the money or something like that, from what I understand. Yeah. And so that was, like, the metalcore festival. But there were hardcore bands on that, too, because I remember, like, I don't know, Champion, Comeback Kid, all the bands from that era were on that, too. But, like, then there was also Posse Numbers, which is all more or less straight hardcore. But it was mostly youth crew stuff.
Yeah.
Mostly, but not
it's
all.
Interesting because even during that early era, when I was like an early teenager and just starting to get into this stuff, there were some bands that had ties to this 90s era that I maybe wasn't conscious of at the time. Like a band like Martyr AD had members from Disembodied.
Correct.
I didn't know that at the time, but I was getting into Martyr AD and all that kind of stuff. You had a band like Converge that also had a foot in this kind of scene.
Yeah, some of those guys were like in Bane.
Yep, 100%, exactly. You know, so you had some of these bands that did have this pullback to, you know, and then obviously, you know, Norma Jean is like kind of taking, even very early on, even though they couldn't pull it off, early on at least, they were trying their best to be as good of a Converge or a Dillinger Escape Plan clone as they could.
Oh, sure.
You know?
Oh, that was a big thing at the time too, though, and that sort of lends itself to sort of like what we're talking about with kind of Rorschach and Protestant, is that like that. I feel like a lot of that stuff laid the groundwork for a lot of like what would become known as like, I mean, I guess chaos core.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of shit.
Which is a term you don't really hear thrown around as much anymore, but people used to use that to kind of split between, because I do know some guys that grew up during that era of the 90s in the hardcore scene, and they kind of use that term chaos core. And I remember when I first started talking to some of those older guys, it was interesting to me because I never called it that. Some people called it like math core and stuff like that.
Right. I mean, sometimes it's just semantics.
Yeah, which I think fits some of those bands, but I don't think it fits other ones as well.
Right.
You know?
But I mean, like, chaos fits this 100%.
Oh, yeah.
100%.
That's the only word I can think about each time immediately when thinking about this album, and like also trying to like pull it away from that, but like it just kept coming back to that as like its anchor, you know.
Oh yeah, and like I also want to bring it back even further, because like I mean, you listen to a band like Rorschach, and I mean, it's pretty obvious, they don't even hide it, like there is big later Black Flag influence.
Oh, all over.
Rorschach.
Like,
it's everywhere.
One of the...
It's everywhere. I mean, Keith Huckins, who's the guitarist of Rorschach and also Dead Guy, and then also after that, Kiss It Goodbye. I mean, you could even hear it in his guitar playing.
Yep, 100%.
But it's different. I wouldn't say that he's like a Greg Ginn clone. He's not. He has his own thing. It's almost like, I mean, I know we're not talking about Dead Guy, but I always referred to Fixation on a Coworker as the evolution of Black Flag.
Yeah.
Like, it's Black Flag just like run through a fucking evil filter and like made
and the later Black Flag material is super controversial even in its era. Like,
yes.
Everybody was on the same page with the early Black Flag stuff. You get to the era of like the process of weeding out and stuff like that and everything else, where they're literally just like punishing the crowd who wants to be there for their punk material to get them the fuck out of the room so that they could play the later material. And then like you get these bands, like I literally have a My War Side 2 tattoo because like that was the dividing line for Black Flag fans. Like My War was kind of like the first real record where like Henry had become like solidified in the band, Henry Rollins. You kind of get like this more forward-thinking Greg Ginn, who's like now trying to leave his punk stuff behind, because Henry came in on the Damage stuff, but that stuff was written when he came in. He was just doing the
Yeah.
vocals for tracks, and that stuff still sounds like just like really punishing hardcore. I almost think of that in the same way as what's that last Danzig Misfits record that I'm slipping on right now? Purple Cover, you know, another Purple Cover. With Robo
We got
on
it, yeah.
drums.
So if anyone watching who isn't familiar with Rorschach, so this is actually the cover right here for Protestant.
Yeah. But yeah, so like the last kind of Danzig record and stuff like that is this total like, you know, balls out, same era, like very, very harsh hardcore, kind of taking it to that peak of like where all the hardcore bands at the time seemed to be going. You couldn't really go beyond that, but then after that, Black Flag decided to go in this totally different direction that was like panned and hated by most fans. Like they were just like, fuck all this new shit you're doing. So it's cool to hear all these like bands in the 90s kind of like starting out with a band like Rorschach, kind of taking that like less liked era of Black Flag that was super experimental and like deciding like, let's kind of take the torch from that. Like rather than like, you know, the first 4 years EP and like Six Pack.
I feel like it was a whole breed of people that was really influenced by the fact that Black Flag was pissing everybody off by doing that.
Yep.
But then taking that and running with it and then like pushing it even further, which I love. I mean, I love when any generation does that and just it's just like such a fuck you to the old guys in a way. Love that. And it's like every 10 years that happens.
It's the hard path too though, because like, you know, a band like Black Flag, it's like they're doing the unpopular thing, but they're also doing something that's hard to pull off.
Yes.
Like these guys are pulling from really disparate strange places to get influence from, and that's a lot harder of a thing to pull off. You have to be dedicated a lot more, you have to practice a lot more, all these kind of things. It's very telling to me that like bands like Agnostic Front from that era are what ends up being copied because there's a formula that's a lot easier to follow there.
Absolutely.
A band like Minor Threat, whereas like the cool thing about a band like Rorschach is that they looked at the bands that were hard to copy, like later Black Flag, and were like, let's do something like that, which is a much harder thing to do than to do another Murphy's Law clone, another Agnostic Front clone.
You have all these weird time signatures and stuff too, with like Rorschach and stuff like that, where I mean,
and you have to take risks. I mean, you know, it's like it's very easy to try and do that sick of it all type of vocal, you know, and just ride on that, you know.
I mean, like even the strangeness of this album itself, like listening to it, I'm like, how do they remember to play this live? Like,
it's
even like
fucking
overwhelming.
overwhelming.
You know, like how do you write chaos?
So, the time signature changes and stuff like that for me actually, like, I almost, not that this is a direct influence at all, but like is way earlier, and I almost think of it's so avant-garde that it like gets into that like Captain Beefheart like, Trap Mask replica kind of like era where it's like they're just memorizing like, you know, oh, here's this abrupt change, and it's like it doesn't really go by like standard sort of like music timing, counting, stuff like that. It's stuff that would be like hard to write out notationally and like in sheet music, but like it's, you just get it from like playing with your friends all the time and be like, oh, we're gonna do this weird thing here that's gonna be like piss us off till the dawn of time, but we're like gonna do it, like, you know. And I think that had a big influence on like the 2000s era.
Absolutely.
Of like, because everybody was into those like janky time signature changes all over the place.
I mean, Dillinger like just took what Dead Guy was doing and kind of made it popular.
You have the prototype, you know, like, and when you get used to listening to that stuff, this stuff sounds almost like so rudimentary.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's still pretty out there compared to classic punk and that kind of stuff. Oh,
sure.
You know?
Absolutely. You know, what's really interesting, though, is then, like, when one band comes along and does it really, really well, then you get a bunch of copies that sometimes they do it really well, but then sometimes it's so watered down.
Yep.
And it's only taking the easy parts from, like, these, quote-unquote, I guess, chaoscore bands or mathcore bands, and then, you know.
Exactly. So, do we want to take a second to kind of talk about, like, some of the resources that we grabbed up when we were researching this? Kind of,
Yeah, you know, there were a couple things that really stood out to me. So, particularly, like, Charles the singer. Charles Maggio.
Okay.
All right. So, I mean, his vocals on this record are nasty. Absolutely nasty. But from, like, what I understand, I was doing some reading, and I didn't know this. Apparently, like, when he was recording a lot of the later Rorschach stuff, he had, like, issues with his voice and his throat.
Okay.
And I think that's why it sounds so blown out. But I mean, it sounds great to me. You know, like, it sounds awesome. It sounds like, he's, like, pushing his vocal cords further than they should. And like, I mean, we could talk about metal, and we could talk about like the control that a lot of people have with like doing gutturals or like anything like that.
There's a technique there.
Yeah.
There's a technique, but like this almost seems like it's like, man, I just like I've got strep throat, and I'm just gonna go into the recording studio and I'm just gonna push it. And I love when bands do that.
Yeah, it's like it's got this very like unsustainable quality to it. Like, it doesn't sound healthy. It doesn't sound like something you could do for which gives it this much more like visceral vibe than something like a Morbid Angel record or something like that. You know? But I wanted to ask, like, were there any like resources that like you guys found like as you were researching this that like seemed really valuable and like helped you out a lot like researching this?
I mean, I would say research-wise, like, I just went through Discogs and, like, just trying to figure out what was going on. And actually, what pulled me was, like, checking out the lyrics for things. And I guess it just kind of keeping this contained in itself was almost, like, my research for it. Because, like, I don't, you know, in the past, I would have, like, put this in line with, like, listening to, like, Crossed Out or Neanderthal and shit like that. But, like,
which they do
now,
split with Neanderthal.
Exactly, and that's where my introduction to them was. But like now, I don't know. Like, yeah, I see it with that, but I don't know.
It's split off in a way. You're saying, right? Like,
yeah,
it's interesting.
Because I remember hearing that like Indecision's influences is Rorschach and Unbroken.
Actually,
and I was like, oh, yo, that's all I hear.
Charles Zahn released The Cure. He does backup vocals.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the Artie era of Indecision. I mean, we're gonna have to do. I feel like we're gonna have to do an entire episode just on Artie Philly alone and all his bands.
Yeah, that would be a fun.
For anyone who doesn't know, just to name a few, Millhouse, then later did vocals for Indecision. He was in a few other bands. You know,
Most Precious Blood.
No, he wasn't in Most Precious Blood.
Really?
That was Tom Sheehan.
Okay. Gotcha.
Tom Sheehan was the first vocalist for Most Precious Blood, and then Rob Fusco from One King Down.
Okay.
Took over vocals
okay, you're right.
for Most Precious Blood. But then Artie went on to be in. I mean, he was in a few other bands here. He was in a band called the Shemps. I think maybe a couple others that I'm kind of missing. But then he was also in Celebrity Murders, and then I think the one he left off on was Concrete Cross.
Okay, I don't know why I thought he was on like the first Most Precious Blood, but I could be totally wrong with that. I would bet you would probably know that better than I would.
Yeah, it was Tom Sheehan who was the first vocalist of Indecision. Artie was the vocalist who took over for Tom after Tom left Indecision.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Two completely different voices, but it's it's interesting because Artie in Millhouse is so raspy and sounds very much like he would be in Rorschach or something. You could just, I mean, you could hear the influence in a band like Millhouse with Rorschach too. You know, as far as Rorschach influencing Millhouse. I think
it's interesting you're saying though that you lean so much on Discogs, because I was actually really psyched to find that Rorschach had a page on Encyclopedia Metallum. Because like me as much more of a metal guy, like that's such a good resource for me. But a lot of times it sucks because like hardcore and metalcore bands typically don't. But because this record in particular, Protestant, has such like a metallic influence on it, they literally made a note on it for like all the like douchebag metalheads that are going to be like, why is this hardcore band on here? They're like, it specifically got added because of Protestant, you know?
Yeah.
So like that was like really awesome though, because like that allows you to kind of like cross research a lot of things and find out like, I got to look into what a lot of the members were also up to in other bands and that kind of stuff, and just also gives you a ton of like reviewers, and you could check out the way that other people like think about and contextualize things that are like actually music journalists. So you know, that was definitely interesting. I actually went and looked a lot into podcasts, other podcasts that I could find, and I actually found 2 interviews with Keith Hawkins, the guitar player. There was the Everything Went Black podcast, which I'm already a fan of, which Mike Hill runs that podcast. He's from Brooklyn, and he does vocals in the band Tombs.
Oh, yeah, right.
He has a podcast that's pretty awesome. And then Where It Went podcast, which is a pretty cool podcast, have a lot of like hardcore stuff. They also did an interview with him, predominantly talking about his era of like Kiss It Goodbye, but they did talk a lot about, you know, Dead Guy and the Rorschach era stuff. Because in a lot of ways, Kiss It Goodbye, like the later band, was like some members of Dead Guy and some members of Rorschach. I believe, and correct me on this if I'm wrong,
it's actually everybody from Rorschach with Tim Singer from Dead Guy singing.
Yep, exactly. So
perfect.
It's basically just which is fucking awesome. But like I think artistically those guys were in a totally different place, so that band just like ends up sounding way different. It doesn't just sound like, you know, Rorschach with, you know, different vocalist. That's not how it is. It's just like it's cool to see the evolution of like their music over that time. But let's see. I also wrote down the Burning Fight book. I haven't had a copy in years, and I think somebody actually borrowed it from me, and I never saw it again, which is typical of a lot of books. But Anthony actually has a copy of it, and we were talking about it.
I was at the show, the release show in Chicago. Yeah, that was one of the best fests. That
was a great book. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty certain that Rorschach is explicitly talked about in that book, but if not, it was Dead Guy. It's definitely Keith Huckins, a lot of interviews in there. It's been years since I've read it. Like I said, I've been thinking about picking it up again. But that book is fucking awesome if anybody's interested in
absolutely,
like especially that 90s era of hardcore. You know, you got bands like 108 in there and
Integrity's in there.
Integrity,
Converge,
Earth Crisis.
Oh, absolutely. Vegan Reich is in there too.
Yeah, Vegan Reich. Yeah, pretty interesting. Was Harvest and Catharsis in there as well?
You know, it's interesting. Like, I don't know if some of those specific bands are in the book as in having their own section. But what's cool about the Burning Fight book is that they went ahead and they interviewed a bunch of people to give a little bit, maybe giving commentary on a specific band. Like, I know I've seen Brian from Catharsis give a little bit of a bit on, you know, either commentating on, you know, the 90s hardcore scene or a particular band.
And the funny thing is, too, though, it's like even if a band doesn't overtly have their own chapter in the book, you could probably piece together a decent bit about X band because of all the interviews with the other members.
Exactly.
Who are probably name-dropping X band constantly throughout the book. So it's like, it's a really good picture of like this particular era in metallic hardcore, metalcore, hardcore, whatever you want to kind of identify it as. I did also... Sadly, I didn't get to watch this because I was having an issue downloading it and getting it to stream, and we were getting close to recording this. But there is a new Dead Guy documentary called Killing Music.
Yeah.
And it's like an $8 rental. And but I was having trouble getting the download link to work. But I'm looking forward to watching that really soon because I did purchase the rental for it. So
you see, I didn't even know that there was a download link at this point because like there was they were actually showing it in like New York City.
Yep.
They showed it in like Ithaca for some reason. I'm not really sure. There were particular like kind of like theaters and stuff that they were like or like venues that they were showing this particular documentary about Dead Guy. And what's interesting, I know you were talking about that particular Metal Encyclopedia page that you found Rorschach on. So what's really interesting about that is that like Dead Guy just did their reunion last year, and that was part of for Decibel magazine.
Yeah,
and that's like a huge metal
magazine
thing. But like Dead Guy's in there, you know what I mean?
I'm pretty sure. So Decibel has their own like Hall of Fame kind of thing, and they induct records into it all the time. If I'm not mistaken, I believe Fixation on the Coworker might have been a Hall of Fame record, like inducted recently, which is fucking awesome that they're starting to pull in a lot of those records. I think Decibel's always been like one of the best kind of music
as far as mainstream. Absolutely.
Like kind of, and they have a lot of really good reputable people that like write for them and contribute to their magazine and stuff like that. So if you're gonna have like a music publication, it's almost a shame that they only cover metal, which makes me happy to now see them branching out a little bit, even though like I'm sure to most people in the world, from metal to hardcore seems like, you know, fucking...
There's so much cross-pollination, though.
Yeah. You know? But it probably seems like so silly, minuscule to most people out there. Like, you know, it's still yelling over guitars. You know?
I think, like, majority of the bands, unless you knew that they were involved with the hardcore scene, you would just think they're a metal band. Or, like, you know, you're an everyday person.
Yeah. That's kind of the interesting thing about a band like Rorschach, though. It's like you almost have... a band that's coming mentally, obviously, from the punk and hardcore scene, but sonically is coming, especially Keith Huckins, the guitar player, coming from much more of a metal standpoint than a punk one. You know, maybe this is a good time to go into the lineup and talk about, like, everybody on the lineup.
Sure.
Do you got it written down, or do you want me to go over it?
I mean, I have a few of the guys written down, actually, because I saw Andrew Gormley, the drummer.
Okay,
so he's been in a few things over the years. Actually,
yes,
I mean, he was...
I found some interesting stuff.
He was in Shai Hulud for a little bit.
Yeah. He did play in Shai Hulud for a little
who
while.
hasn't?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Shai Hulud's been through a number of members, including an ex-member of a band that I was in with Anthony.
I think everyone's had a piece of Shai Hulud at this point.
Was there crossover with this with Infest also?
I didn't come across that.
That I'm not sure.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that I'm not sure.
I think I saw it on Discogs.
It is interesting though, right? Because you think of Infest and you think, okay, well that's like power violence. But it was like interesting what you were saying that like with like Neanderthal and stuff too, and being lumped into that too. Like Neanderthal is also like they're a power violence band.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. And Rorschach is not. I wouldn't consider Rorschach is not a power violence band.
They
but
have some moments that I think
they fit a little bit, but I wouldn't classify them as.
No.
I think that's just like
Yeah.
the chaotic like violence of the music itself.
Sure.
Like, why it kind of fits in there. So it's like you have like your power violence and then like your emo violence and like just whatever violence
What?
you get in there.
Yeah, we'll get all the
Just
violence
fucking
in there.
throw it, you know?
Got your emo violence, your power violence.
I also think part of it is that like power violence is this weird like kind of middle genre between hardcore and grindcore. Like, you know, you kind of have this like weird scene that popped up like right between the two, kind of pulling from like Siege predominantly and like maybe a little bit of Repulsion, not going full grindcore, that kind of stuff. But Keith Huckins, straight up, like I'm finding in interviews with him during the Rorschach era, is citing Carcass, which is a straight up, and also they played with Napalm Death on like very, so like they're obviously just listening to straight up grindcore. Like it's not like they're delving in that kind of like Siege territory where it's like still 1 foot in hardcore, you know. So they've just gone in listening wise, you know, even Godflesh he was talking about as being a major influence even early on. So it's like obviously Godflesh isn't grindcore, but like, you know, Justin Broderick from Godflesh is obviously a seminal figure in starting grindcore, you know.
Sure.
I do have some notes on like the nitty gritty of the early bits of Rorschach.
It was a bit faster, the early stuff, wasn't it?
No. I was going to talk about like Keith Huckins, the guitar player, and Charles, the vocalist, actually, it's kind of interesting talking about that they knew each other really early on, like in high school.
I mean, the band started in like '89, I think, right?
Yeah, but even pre-Rorschach, apparently they had a generic like hardcore band, the two of them, in high school that apparently played 2 or 3 live shows, and they like couldn't keep it together. It kind of fell apart. Nobody was really serious other than the two of them, but they said it was like a very, very typical run-of-the-mill meat and potatoes hardcore band. And the two of them grew up in New Jersey, like 15 minutes outside of New York City. And it's interesting because in the interviews that I read with Keith Huckins, he described himself during this time as a typical suburban metal kid. But also, like I said, he was playing in, you know, a very, what he described as like typical band. And, you know, I don't even know if it had a name. If it did, he didn't say. But he said a very just like
I'm curious about that, actually.
Forgettable.
Like, that's something I'd like to hear if that were 100%. Available. Just to...
But apparently, they met Nick Forte, who would go on to play guitar in Rorschach, and who then introduced them to Andrew Gromley, and they were from the area of, I believe, Nyack, New York, or that's at least where they met them at a show up there. And Andrew would go on to be the drummer, and, you know, obviously Nick Forte would play guitars. And I thought this was cool originally. So Charles, in their band that they were playing in before, did bass, and Keith was playing guitar. And even in the earliest lineup of Rorschach, Charles was actually playing bass. And they tried out a bunch of different vocalists, and these vocalists would come in, and he'd be like frustrated because it seemed like everybody who tried out didn't know how to do vocals. So he was like trying to coach them into like, no, this is how you do it. And he would kept hopping on and be like, no, do it like this. And they got frustrated, and they said like him and Keith and like even the rest of the guys who had already joined the band were like, you know what, fuck it, dude. Like, you should just play bass and do vocals. So apparently the earliest bits of Rorschach, he was doing bass and vocals until they actually got a bass player, like, which is pretty interesting. I thought that was pretty cool.
I think Earth Crisis, I mean, completely different band and probably not even relevant, but I think Earth Crisis had that same trajectory where Carl wasn't the vocalist at first. He was playing bass or something, I believe.
Writing music.
Yeah. And I have here that, so I actually believe between the drummer and Nick Forte, the guitar player, they knew another guy, Chris Lucella, who played bass, but good to know is that he actually played bass on like Remain Sedate, the Needle Pack 7-inch, and the Neanderthal split, but he left and they got Tom Runsack on Protestant. So Protestant is the only recording that this particular bass player is on, which is interesting because I really had a lot to say about the bass playing on this record.
They're like, when I think of parts that stick out, it's like certain hits that the bass is doing, even if it's like, you know, just particular like pulling strings or like really fucking sour notes that they pull out,
the sour notes,
and like those are the things that like stick out.
That's it right there. It's that, the sour notes is actually a really it's so interesting that you say that or use that kind of term, because that's like this entire band. It's that sort of discomfort chord.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Discomfort chords. I'm gonna call it that.
You know, it was something really interesting that I heard too. Like apparently on the Remain Sedate sessions, there was a guy that lived locally in New Jersey, and or maybe it was for the demos of this, but he basically like fancied himself a really good producer engineer, and they said this guy was basically like way overconfident in his skills. He kind of had trash equipment, all this kind of stuff, but the guy thought he was like the shit. So they went to his place to record, and apparently he had a tuner that was like some big contraption that was like the size of a microwave.
Oh, Jesus.
And like they said it was the most annoying thing to use. You couldn't figure out like if you were in tune, and the guy was basically just like, yeah, no, keep going, you're in tune, like go ahead. So he said actually like later on they went and like he was trying to match up to the record and realized that it's like past E.
Oh,
It's,
it was like very
closer
slightly
to
up.
F.
It was between
Like,
two. It was between
yeah.
like two tunings.
But like he was saying though about how a lot of like the sound of that record bothers him because it's off, and it's really funny to hear that like the band is super happy with the recording on Protestant because there's intentional sour notes,
Right.
Yeah.
but there's unintentional sour notes on the early material, and that really upsets them. You know, like, so it's just like, which probably seems absurd to anybody who's not into like noisy, metallic, like,
Right.
you know, strange music. They're like, you know, oh, it's both kind of like off sounding, like what's the fucking problem? But you know, it's like off in the ways that they intended it to be off.
I think that really like speaks to the fact that the whole album, like not tease but like torture the album itself, because it's so apparent that they know what they're doing and that they can play.
Yep.
But they do this on purpose.
Yep.
You know? So like seeing that like when with the recording like of Protestant, they were cool with that and the sourness and like the discomfort of that album, but like when it was out of their control, they're not cool.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
And it's like, and there's times too, like on Protestant, where like they'll go through a riff one time and they play it like almost the quote unquote correct way, and then they're like, all right, well, let's like make it a little more fucked up, and then they like kind of like through repetition, like if Rorschach is gonna repeat a riff, they almost like beat the shit out of it throughout the song, and like it starts to degrade. So they play it correct the first time and then slowly start playing it more and more like off and wrong.
That's a really, really good word to use to describe Rorschach too, is like the degrading of sound.
Yeah.
And just like deteriorating almost. Deteriorating is another one, I guess, too.
Which fits from everything from the instruments up to the vocals. Like I was saying, it's this like unsustainable quality to the vocals. It's the whole thing has this energy of like it's gonna fucking fall apart. Like,
yes, but you know, it's interesting that you talk about all of that, but like the drumming is really, really fucking tight.
Yeah,
I mean,
this powerful, punchy, but still weird. Like, you know,
it's jazzy,
odd decisions, but like with conviction. Like, not, like there's not a fuck ton of ghost notes and like very like dancey, flashy stuff. There is like odd and like cool things going on, but it's nothing that's done like to be too flowery or anything like that.
Yeah, no, it's raw. That's the thing, and I think that's the mistake a lot of bands that came after like Rorschach and Dead Guy and Kiss It Goodbye, when they tried to draw influence from like, you know, Huckins and Andrew and stuff like that, is that it almost became like they took that formula and they tried to polish it, and it didn't need to be polished.
No.
Keep it raw, keep it dirty.
And keep some punch to it.
Yes.
Like, to where the drums are still chopsy, but left of center. While still. I have another note here that I actually found going back to like the roots of this band and talking about like the early bit. I couldn't really tell if Huckins was being facetious with this and kind of making a bit of a joke, but he did say, and it seemed to be serious, I was trying to reread it a couple times to see if he wasn't. But he said at first he just intended Rorschach to be a youth crew style typical New York hardcore. I couldn't, and I'm not really sure if he was being tongue in cheek because I found this
it's like hard to say.
I found this in a print interview, so I couldn't figure out. I'm like, you did play originally in like in a band, and they did talk about that they liked a lot of these like youth crew bands,
right?
You know, like. I was finding spots where they were talking about like bands like Floor Punch and fucking Youth of Today and like saying positive things about them.
Sure.
You know?
I mean, we like a lot of that stuff too. You know what I mean? But it's apples and oranges. It's a completely different vibe. It's a completely different crowd.
Though I will say that there's a song on the Neanderthal split. I believe it's called like Brain Drain or Brain Dead or something like that. Which that song apparently is about like a lot of the youth crew guys, their obsession with kind of Krishna consciousness and like how stupid they thought that whole thing was.
Okay.
You know, which as a 108 fan, I'm like a little offended by, but like, you know.
By the time 108 rolls around, though, I feel like the lens changes with that. But we could get into that in another episode.
For sure, 100%. But I thought that was interesting because it's like trying to get a grasp on like what these even lyrics are about. You know, because I think on Protestant they're a little bit more abstract. But, you know, like you get these glimpses in earlier stuff where it's a little bit more overt and being like, you know, talking shit on, you know, Krishna consciousness and that kind of stuff, you know, like, so I thought that was interesting. And I mean, he straight up said though that by Remain Sedate, obviously it hadn't worked out that they were going to be a typical New York hardcore or youth crew band. And he talked about too that like even if they wanted to kind of go that direction of being a typical New York hardcore youth crew band, that like he cited things like Slayer, which I hear all over his playing.
I've heard that too, actually. Yeah.
Creator, you know, obviously like a speedy thrash metal band, that kind of stuff. These are early influences too, like even the Remain Sedate era, like early in the band. Celtic Frost. You know, and Voivod, which when I heard that, I was like, I hear tons of Nothing Face and what's that? I think it's called Speed Rat or something like that is the record after Nothing Face. And like, I immediately was just like, and that's kind of contemporary to this. You know, Killing Industries, I think is like a late 80s era kind of Voivod record. I don't know how like familiar with Voivod you guys are, but like, once I heard that, I was like, that makes so much fucking sense to me. Like,
that's really interesting that you brought up Slayer, actually, because there was another, I forget which podcast I was listening to that was talking about Dead Guy and specifically like fixation on a coworker, and then went on to talk about Keith Huckins and said that Keith Huckins' playing is like Jeff Hanneman and Greg Ginn put together. But I think it's actually more than that. I think that might even be simplifying it. I think it's actually even more than that, but...
Yeah, because like I said, I totally hear a lot of these influences of things like Voivod and that kind of stuff.
Right.
And it was interesting because I saw later in some of the interviews that people almost wanted to talk about an influence that wasn't there with Huckins because like they were like talking about like sub pop type of like college and like indie rock type of stuff, maybe that Sonic Youth type of thing where like you get into that noisy guitar rock, and he was very convicted that he was like, no, fuck that shit, I do not listen to that shit.
I love it.
And even like some of the other guys in Dead Guy were saying like, you know, that they kind of like that stuff.
Yeah.
But Keith Huckins was very like, no, I do not listen to that shit. Like, do not fucking put that on me. Like, that you listen to that shit. I don't listen to that shit. But like, the interesting thing to me though is like, I wouldn't be surprised if the guys from Voivod listen to a lot of that stuff.
Oh,
so like, he's kind of secondhand getting maybe some of that. And then also
through a filter, yeah.
And then also, you know, Keith Huckins and the band toured a lot with the Unsane, which that band I think probably took a lot from a band like Sonic Youth and that kind of stuff. So even if they're not getting it straight from the horse's mouth, you know, I think you might be getting some of that stuff anyway, you know.
Yeah, it's like sometimes like that influence just like sort of you know, you become influenced by that kind of stuff just sometimes by proxy, just by hanging around.
I was going to say that too, going back to the Black Flag stuff. While I don't think any of the guys from Rorschach, you know, obviously like Keith being one of the more explorative listeners, and bringing in like more far-flung influences to the band. I don't think any of those guys would get into like avant-garde jazz or jam band music the way that Greg Ginn was, but they're almost getting that second hand. Like,
exactly.
There was like the last track, Ornaments, on the record, which is probably one of my favorites because it's so creepy, like atmospheric and like mood setting. And there's other moments on the record too that I hear like that process of weeding out like live jam band kind of like thing that Black Flag was doing, but they're getting it from Black Flag,
right?
Not where Black Flag's getting it
right.
from,
It's already
like
it's ran through a filter.
Dead.
It's ran through the filter of Black Flag, so therefore you're
where Greg Ginn was a huge. I mean, even you could find there's Black Flag, Grateful Dead ripoff merch,
right?
You know, like you could find the Steal Your Face with the bars in it and stuff like that, and I think Greg Ginn had that on his amplifier for a while. You know, and like a lot of stuff was, especially during that era, nods to the Grateful Dead and like jam bands like that and the Allman Brothers and that kind of stuff. I don't think Keith Huggins was listening to that at fucking all, but Greg Ginn was. You know,
I'm actually curious to hear what your guys' favorite tracks were, and I have a couple things written here that I thought was super interesting. I love how the record starts off with Mandible.
Yes,
and it just hits you right there.
100%.
And then
that's a for the
and that's side A, but then you flip it over to side B. It starts with Blinders.
Yep.
Which has that like kind of creepy, kind of almost kind of like clean, kind of which sounds a lot like in Dead Guy Riot Stairs, that beginning.
Yes. Okay.
I got a lot of vibe from that, but like it's the same guitarist, so you know what I mean. Like it makes sense.
So I guess let's talk about Mandible then. You know, do you guys have any notes on that? Because I have kind of something funny to say about.
Immediately hearing that shit, like, I immediately think Indecision, and like if they were to open a set with that, like say I was there and they're like, oh, we're gonna play this shit, that would be the song that would get me from the back immediately to the front and be like, all right, it's fucking on, and then it's like kind of manipulating.
It's so interesting because I know Pat said that, and I know this too, that Rorschach was a huge influence for Indecision. But Indecision is such a raw and stripped down band, whereas Rorschach is a raw and technical band. I don't know. It's just super, super interesting to me. I feel like it like Indecision almost created from Rorschach like their own sound, but it is like so stripped down. It is some of the most like simple kind of song structures, whereas Rorschach, like we were saying before, is very much complex.
You know, and it's like with this song, and so it's funny, like you mentioned the song Mandible, and then like the other song Blinders. Both in those songs, I have that there's a strange death rock influence. Like I hear the death rockness in both of those.
I wasn't thinking of that at all. That's really cool.
Yeah, like there was a French band from like the late '90s and early 2000s called Martyr Whore, and originally I was like, oh, they take like, it's like if you took the beginning of Christian Death's like Only Theater of Pain and then just like did that over and over again. But now listening, I'm like, holy shit, were they actually listening to Rorschach? Like, definitely I would say check out Martyr Whore.
I mean, that kind of checks out a bit, honestly, just because I know the guys in Indecision, if they're taking influence from Rorschach, I know the guys from Indecision were very much into goth.
Yeah.
They were very much into Susie and the Banshees. They even did some rips. They were into Bauhaus, you know, or the big four of goth, right? They were into like Sisters and stuff like that. And
yeah, again, I feel like...
So I could hear that a little bit.
Again, getting into like Keith's kind of like reading a lot of interviews and watching stuff with him, though, it seemed like he was very like... He knew where his boundaries were, even though he was going really like far with his influences. And, like, I think he picked some interesting things, but he seemed like he knew where his line was, and he didn't want to go beyond it. Mm-hmm. You know, like, so, I don't know. It could be interesting to see, like, if any of that stuff came in. But, again, like, just seeing the way that he was when people brought up that kind of, like, artsy...
It could have
like,
been coincidence.
Guitar rock stuff. He was like, no, fuck you, I don't go there.
Right.
You know? Like, at all. Like, I do, you know, but, like, when it came down to talking about the weirder side of metal bands and stuff like that, he was all about it.
Yeah.
You know, like, I wrote for this song... that in the very beginning of the track, I heard very hard on its sleeve that, like, from the first bit of feedback, like, the Black Flag on its sleeve. But then also, like, I was thinking about the fact of, like, what other bands can I think of that so clearly have that Black Flag influence that you could hear it. And the band that came to mind, and the player, was Dave Chandler from St. Vitus. I was immediately like... I think that's probably the only guitar player, like bridge-wise, that I could think of where I immediately think of that later Black Flag era. You know, and it's so apparent to me. I'm like, so if I have to think of 3 guitar players, like, you know, that like kind of go in almost like an obvious line, I'm sitting there and I'm like, Greg Ginn, Chandler, and Huckins, you know, and I'm like, that's an interesting trajectory, you know, and again, St. Vitus having one foot in hardcore and that kind of stuff, and then the other foot also in metal, like, interesting to me too, you know. And then the other thing that I realized, and once I realized it, I couldn't unhear it. I even went and compared the 2 songs back and forth. I almost take Huckins on that track as like being 70% Black Flag and like 30% Slayer. Okay. And I feel like if you take Mandible, it is the blueprint for The Saddest Day by Converge. You could listen to some of the riffs on it; they're almost fucking identical. Like you can actually like, and basically like I'm like
I never thought of that, but
Kurt Ballou basically was like, what if Mandible instead of 30% Slayer was 50% Slayer?
Right.
And like that is the difference between The Saddest Day and
all that early Converge stuff. Well, not all the early Converge stuff, because like I mean, early Converge could be broken down into I think 2 bands: Starkweather and Rorschach.
I might throw one more in there, but I might say At the Drive-In.
At the Drive-In, really?
Yeah, because they do have those like kind of like guitar rock points where they get like where especially the parts where Jake does his like pseudo clean singing that's obviously influenced by Today Is the Day, but like the guitars that they're doing underneath that a lot of times like sound like At the Drive-In. Or
that
like
would have been the
like
third
Jehu,
band I'd bring was
like
Today.
Like that. Like
I would have brought in Today's the Day, especially if you listen to Jane Doe and the way that the vocals are kind of like recorded.
I'm talking about the like early,
like Petitioning the Empty Sky and stuff like
exactly,
that. Yeah,
that sort of stuff. They go into those like spots where it sounds like upbeat and like a little more like positive and like out of place.
Yeah,
that stuff sounds like. And then it's funny because like years later you hear them revisit that with like there's that Aimless Arrow track. There was like a straight up like At the Drive-In riff, like on that whole thing, and I'm like, they've been playing with those like At the Drive-In type of like riffs since the beginning. You know, I feel like it sounded out of place there, and I'm like, but in an interesting way. And it's like they've been playing with that since the beginning.
They would have been. I mean, At the Drive-In's only been around since what, like the late '90s, right? Like, so they would have been playing side by side.
Side by side.
You know, not so much influence.
It might just be the same influences as At the Drive-In.
And if it just reminds you of it too, like that's you know what I mean? Like, yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. But those like early like kind of emo bands, you know, like that sort of stuff. It's like I hear that stuff and Converge didn't really know how to mix them at first. I felt like
early emo is also real fucking dirty.
Yeah.
No, it is like Sunny Day Real Estate. A lot of people are surprised when they find out that like Diary, for example, is in I believe that entire record is it's in D standard. They're a full step down.
Wow.
Yeah. And then like anyway, not to get off track, just throwing that in there.
Let's see. I want to just see if there's any. I did think it was interesting too. I just wanted to go back to kind of talking about kind of Keith's sound and what makes it interesting is he talked about using you know, passive pickups, that type of stuff, which again like you see in modern metallic hardcore and that kind of stuff, a lot of like active pickups, EMGs, that kind of stuff, and it's very like clean, polished sound. I think it's cool to hear a band that's like allowing all the noise to come through in their guitars, allowing like tons of feedback, that kind of stuff, which is really typical of a lot of the bands of this era. Though what was weird is a little bit of his setup because he's running Marshall stacks.
Yeah.
You know, he was like very, very about Marshall, and he actually said that Remain Sedate, again, that early engineer and producer, bullied him, he said, strong-armed him into using Mesa cabinets and heads, and he said that's part of the reason why he also hates the sound of that early record, because he said he didn't use his usual equipment on it.
Well, I mean, that's interesting, too, because I feel like, I mean, you get some pretty dirty sounds from Marshalls.
Yeah, but that's what he was wanting to use.
Oh,
but
okay, I understand.
The engineer wanted him to use a Mesa Boogie cabinet and head, and he said that he basically felt like he got bullied into using, you know, that as equipment because he insisted it would sound better, and he is not happy with the way that. I mean, I love the Marshall sound.
I mean, Slayer was using Marshalls too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, exactly, and he said that I think that was a big influence on it. But then also, what was interesting to me was that he said he's like a religious user of BC Rich guitars, specifically.
Okay.
He actually said to this day he owns 4 BC Rich guitars. He owns a piece of shit acoustic guitar that never ever gets touched, a Yamaha bass, and an Ibanez that he never plays.
Why mention it?
Because he was literally... Because I was reading an interview with him.
Oh, this is so funny.
I was reading an interview with him, and he was talking about, like, they were mentioning, like, oh, do you still use BC Rich guitars? And he's like, fucking worship them.
Yeah.
I own 4 of them, and I play them all constantly.
Fuck yeah.
And he's like, I have other guitars, but fuck those guitars. Like, he's like, my BC Riches are it. And I was like, I thought that was interesting. He also said that, too, he got a situation where, like, they were rehearsing for a show and he had to play a Stratocaster. I think he mentioned that he owned one at one point. He said he fucking hates Stratocasters.
Mm-hmm.
Like, cannot play them, thinks they're fucking garbage, all that kind of stuff, which is interesting because I would think for his type of sound might be a cool guitar to mess with. Like,
Absolutely.
it would be, like, an interesting sound. You know, a lot of guys who prefer that more, like, whiny, like, tinny sound, like, really love Stratocasters, but, like, you know, he was like, absolutely, or Jag or something like that, or Gibson SG, like, that's like the
Yeah, it's a
preferred
versatile guitar
guitars.
too.
So interesting to hear that he's like going for BC Riches for that kind of sound, you know, which is probably, again, the Slayer influence and that kind of stuff. But, you know, I thought that was interesting. He also talked about, too, that, like, you think of Rorschach, and you could hear it on this, that this is, like, a gritty, like, noisy sound. And he talked about, too, that he enjoys a lot of, obviously, like, Neurosis through Silver and Blood, he said was, like, probably his favorite record of all time.
That checks out.
If not top 3.
Yeah.
And he said even early on in Rorschach and whatnot, like, by the time Protestant, for sure, like, he was already basically, like, from the very beginning following what Neurosis was doing.
Oh, at that time,
You know?
I mean, I think Neurosis probably they put out Souls at Zero like 92, I think. So
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
probably
yeah,
around the
exactly.
time that.
But he was just kind of
Protestant
saying he
came
was
out.
basically, like, paying very close attention to what
Yeah.
Neurosis was doing pretty much from the very start. Like, you
Right,
know,
they were like what? They were like Amoebics-ish in the beginning,
yeah.
and then they slowed down.
Yep.
And honestly, in the context of Neurosis, all their shit's great.
But
All their shit's great.
I did think it was cool, though, just kind of hearing his different influences and stuff, because he was talking about, too, I was finding he was saying at the time he was super into reading, like, the weird comics, which is the stuff that I'm into, the stuff that's, like, on Vertigo,
Okay.
all the super painted comics, you know, Kent Williams type of stuff, all that kind of
Like
shit. which I was
Sandman, stuff like that?
Yeah, which I was, like, super excited to hear, because that's the kind of stuff that I like, and I've been getting hated on by, like, nerdy real comics fans for fucking years about.
Real Comics TM.
And, you know, he was just talking about, too, that he also liked black metal, but interestingly enough, absolutely hated all, like, the lo-fi necro sound stuff. Which
Okay.
for a band that's super noisy is, like, interesting to hear. You know, like, that he wouldn't necessarily be into. Because I would think if you were going to be into black metal and you sound like Rorschach, that, you know, Transylvanian Hunger and, like, those type of Dark Throne records, or, like, all that kind of early stuff would be, like, very up your alley. But interesting to hear that in fact, like, was the stuff that he didn't like.
He was more into the thrashy stuff.
Yeah, or the stuff that just had more of a higher recording quality. You know, he
Gotcha.
didn't really list anything specific, but basically said completely that stuff that wanted to go for that more necro sound was not of interest to him, like, whatsoever. So I'm guessing maybe, like, a band like Emperor might be more up the alley than, you know, a Dark Throne.
Gotcha.
Or something like that.
I mean, I'm glad, like you mentioned, like the black metal influence at all, because that's what I heard with the vocals throughout this.
The big vocal influence that I found from what I could find pretty much completely comes from D. Cruisin'.
Okay.
Like, you know, and I could hear it. Like, if you listen to D. Cruisin', you could pretty much get, like, the vocal influence right there, which is, like, a more artsy, out there, like, kind of almost industrial adjacent band, you know?
You know, it's also hard to comment on this too, because, like, we're a little bit younger, and I think context of the time is very, very important when trying to talk about a record like this and talking about a band like this, and because, like, I think we're seeing it through a lens where, like, we were exposed to a lot of, you know, the stuff.
Music, because I'm surprised even that they were even talking about black metal.
Right.
Because that stuff would have been almost contemporary to that time, and you think that that's happening on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
When tape trading's still a thing. So the fact that they even like knew enough about black metal is like surprising to me in like the early 90s. Like,
I mean, enough to be like, I like this style and not this style.
Exactly. Like that's
right.
very, like now we can go and listen to fucking anything. Like somebody can release something in Finland this morning and we can listen to it like right. Now. But like, so that's like a privilege that we have now. But it's like interesting because I hear so many people who were around back then that didn't even know what was going on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like people were really just stuck in the Lower East Side and knew what was going on with the bands there. And unless, you know, the band brands used to show up to play places and people were like, wait a second, you guys are fucking black? Like, what the hell? Like, you know, that's like so bizarre to think of now, but like people knew nothing about like music back then and like what was going on. Like,
yeah, you had to really like be hanging out in record stores like 24/7.
Yep.
And like, and also on top of that, like find a good record store. You know, have a guy who's got his ear to the ground. And I don't really know what the context of that would even be like, because like, I mean, all that stuff was sort of being phased out. Quite a bit, you know, by the time I was starting to kind of get into the music, but we did have some good record stores around here. Like there was one like right by us on Long Island called None of the Above.
Yeah,
I think that was one of the first record stores I ever went to.
There was
like maybe 13 or 14 in the 90s.
There was a weird record store that was kind of like I lived in this like small, very like eastern town that like had fucking nothing going on in it, but we had this store that popped up for a little bit called For Those About to Rock.
Okay.
Which the owner was an obvious like AC/DC fan.
Yeah.
But he hired this guy Andrew Jones actually, who used to play in a punk band called the Backup Plan, which is pretty big. And
of course,
Andrew was a couple years older than me, and he worked there. And kind of like the owner gave him the ability to kind of order things, and like so he started filling the store with stuff that he was interested in. And me being a couple years younger, I really looked up to him, like knowing that he was in, you know, the Backup Plan and knew all these guys that would eventually go on to even like, you know, start like This Is Hell and, you know, bands like that. And, you know, he was really hooked into the hardcore scene, and I would go in there and kind of talk to him. And I remember getting like Daughters Canada songs from there, Some Girls, Locust, the Number 12 Looks Like You, the Red Chord, just like in a lot of these bands, like were the first time me hearing them, and just kind of through going there. And then also stuff like the Casualties, you know, like street punk stuff. Like, and I bought like a T-shirt, and like I remember even going there and buying like pretty much every AFI record before Sing the Sorrow, like, and just like blasting through all of those, like, which I still defend that band to death. Everybody
those early
knows.
AFI records are unfuckwithable.
Probably like go over and talk about them. This is like I remember never like liking them, and then one of my old friends was like, listen to the first record, and I was like, yo, what the fuck is this, man?
I don't even like the early punk stuff. It's good, but it's not my thing. But like,
I mean, that's what got me in.
All Hallows EP and like Black Sails in the Sunset and that kind of stuff. Like when they really start messing with the goth material.
Yeah,
that's the shit.
True.
Like,
it was all pretty. I mean, all that stuff was pretty good though. Like I felt like. I mean, I got into AFI. I mean, that was on a Nitro Records comp that my sister gave me in 5th grade, and I played the hell out of that thing. Yeah. I mean, maybe we'll have to do an episode on AFI at some point.
Yeah.
But...
I mean. That stay tuned for that one. I'm gonna have fun. You know, Mr. Black Metal guy will have a blast talking about.
Maybe we could even get Davey in here or something like that. Since,
yeah.
you know, I mean,
fun,
we've got sort of like the straight edge connection going on
Yeah,
between the three of us. So like maybe he'll be like, oh yeah.
We'll get Davey to acoustically sing Straight Edge Revenge like with Ceremony coming into it. So back to Rorschach. The last thing that I wanted to talk about with Keith Huckins that I thought was really interesting was listening to interviews with him and reading, and I kind of getting a sense for his personality. I was surprised at how kind of like a nice, genuine, like nerdy guy he seemed to be, but that kind of goes completely against the reputation he had as a stage performer.
Yeah, he's a fucking monster.
On stage, like, and you've heard people, like, kind of when he wasn't around, or, like, interviews with people or watching them live, like, he was such an aggressive dude on stage, which I almost see him as, like, the prototype of a bands you see later in the 90s, like, Botch and Dillinger Escape Plan and the early Converge shows that were super infamous. They were kind of just taking the same energy that Rorschach was playing with early on, and especially Keith, like, flailing around and like having all these stories of him like giving people fucking concussions and shit by hitting them in the head with
He's also, I want to point out that the difference between Huckins and a lot of these like contemporary kind of like metalcore guitarists is that like a lot of those metalcore guitarists were like, they look like string beans.
Yeah.
You see pictures of Huckins? Like, he's
Yeah.
a stocky dude.
Yep.
He's not someone I'd want to fucking get hit with a guitar by.
Yeah.
I've actually, like, I've
And those
heard...
BC Riches have sharp edges.
Yeah.
Like, maybe that's why he doesn't like a Stratocaster, man. It's got rounded edges.
I've heard people refer to, like... I've heard people refer to his personal bubble when he places, like, the Huckins zone.
Yeah,
And, like, not to step inside there because you'll get fucking clocked.
Yep. 100%.
And dude, like, he's still like, I mean, I caught the Dead Guy reunion over at St. Vitus back in November, and like, yeah, like, he's still like a fucking angry old dude, like, swinging around his guitar, and like, that was just such a pleasure to see, because I'm like, damn, man, when I get to my 50s and I'm pushing 60, I'm gonna lose all my vitality and stuff like that, and see a dude that's a little bit older, like, fucking still has it and still swinging his shit around and maintaining that intensity. That's fucking awesome.
It's funny too, man, because it's like, I feel like if you really internalize, if you're the type of person who really internalizes that later Black Flag material, like, everybody likes Black Flag, but if you're super into the later material, and like, you come across like a real nice guy, I'm kind of a little bit like, who hurt you? Like, come on, there's fucking darkness in you, dude. Like, that's why you resonate with that shit. Like, you know, that's not normal. Like, you find those last couple Black Flag records that nobody likes, there's a reason. You know?
Some easy listening, you know?
Yeah,
put on a...
You know, like, oh yeah, I just put on like Rat's Eyes and fucking, like, you know, Room 13 and like those type of tracks because like I'm really happy and I have, like, you know, a pleasant fucking nothing left inside because, like, you know, I just had a really good home upbringing and I'm very well adjusted. You know, like, no,
probably a serial killer.
Yeah, 100%. So if you guys want to get back to the track list though, track 2 we got In Ruins. You guys have anything to say about that track?
Yeah, I think first things that came to mind, like, just, like, kind of stream of consciousness, like, responding to everything. It was like blast beats, like, there was something almost like Holy Terror about it, and then there was like a manic jazz feeling, and then like it was also like a manic that's on like the edge of absolute fucking ruin. But like, mentioned this before, like earlier when we started, like the whole thing has like this quality of just like almost falling apart and being on that edge, but like it's so fucked up because you know that they can play and it's on purpose.
I was gonna say, I feel like I feel like we spent probably just a half hour just talking about Huckins, and like, he's incredible.
Yeah.
But like, I just want to bring up their drummer again. Like, the drumming on these fucking tracks is just like,
yo, the fucking blasts are insane, because like even at points it reminded me of like death metal shit, like Head Rot and like Butchery and shit like that.
I wrote down Carcass. I'm like, this is where I hear the Carcass influence, and like Napalm Death, Scum, particularly, like, you know, the way that the blasts sound on Scum, Mick Harris playing on those, like, and I was like, if they were gonna get called Power Violence, this is the most Power Violence track probably in their discography.
Yeah,
you know, yeah, and then I also just wrote too that I wanted to contrast this track with where they go later in the record, because like I was like, this is the most, again, fastest, upbeat, kind of like raw aggression, and then just kind of thinking about where the record goes later with like the sludgy, more creepy.
I was gonna say, I feel like side B gets very kind of like slower and
which
darker.
Could very well be conscious with the kind of Black Flag My War sort of thing, where side A is much more punk and straightforward,
right, and
side B is the Black Sabbath meets Black Flag side, you know, as
that's Greg interesting. I mean, it's very well, it could have been intentional in that way.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I don't think it's personally as dramatic as maybe Black Flag, but I wouldn't be surprised if they intentionally, you know, came in with that idea. Anything else about In Ruins?
No,
I don't got anything.
It's traditional. Like, track 3. What do you guys think?
I didn't put it down. There's parts in this album actually that kind of remind me of like the listening experience of like, if it's like power electronics or some like type of ambient thing where like I'll go into, it's like a weird like fucking like disillusioned trance, like, and then there's parts where like I'll be listening like this song is real fucking long and then it's over. And, you know, like, that will be even, like, with, like, a long-ass meditation thing where, like, you're right on the edge and, like, all right, can I keep going? And then, like, time's up, you know? Like, there's times where, like, I'll pop back in, like, in and out. And, like, it also reminds me of, like, you know, early times when I was, like, practicing early meditations, like just popping in and out of reality, and like, or certain things will come up and like will hit me, and I think it's like the little things, like the bass parts that stand out, and like little blasts and like little pieces of chaos, and like I would be gone, like I'll be lost in this album and then like back.
It was definitely one of my favorite things in the sludgier sections and the more atmospheric and creepy sections of the record, because I almost felt like during a lot of those sections, the band had a really cool way of, even with the vocals, everything kind of snaked and ebbed and flowed in what was grabbing your attention. Like, the drums would push a little bit harder. The bass would pull a little bit harder.
That's really interesting you bring that up.
The vocals. And it was never, like, abrupt during those sections. It was, like, snaking. You know, because, like, and my brain just, like, didn't know what to...
I was going to say, I had a really hard time actually listening to this track by track and not as just one whole cohesive piece.
No, I think
which is why I didn't have, like, I mean, I have my notes here, and I have a couple tracks listed, but really I think it's about the full experience, and since, like, it's so kind of, like, chaotic and intentionally chaotic, it was hard to break it down track by track, but really listen to it as a complete piece.
Yeah. The weird thing, though, is, like, it's so complete in the way it sounds. And, like I was saying, like, during those sludgy sections where, like, everything snakes and, like, battles for your attention and you kind of don't really know, but everything is interesting, so you kind of want to try
and it's not sloppy. It's not sloppy at all, but it's super interesting to me because, like, I could give you a track-by-track kind of, like, analysis of, like, any Dead Guy record.
Yeah.
Because, like, it's a bit more kind of cohesive. Whereas with this, it's definitely more raw. It's more primitive. It's not sloppy in any way. It's very well put together.
And you could hear everything. Like, you could pick it. You could listen to this whole record and be like, I'm only going to listen to the bass, and you could pretty much pick it out note for note. You could sit there and tab it out pretty easy, which I'm so used to. Like, modern records, a lot of them go for this wall of sound kind of thing, and everything is very murky. And, like, this is not that at all. I can pick out every single hit of every single thing at any point in time, which was, like, super cool and interesting to hear. And, like, even especially with the drums, I noticed that, like, I can hear every single hit. I can hear all the bass drums. There's none of that, like, modern drum production on any of this that, like, it's funny because, like, you know, it's the kind of thing that's, like, fetishized by, like, a drummer like Fenris from Darkthrone now, where he's trying to get that, like, vintage sound, which I think Black Flag really hit on in their later era too, that almost, like, classic rock sound to the drums and whatnot. I actually, like, just when I first had that thought of, like, how classic rock the drums kind of sound, and, like, the way that, like, the bass drum sounds and the snare, even though they're, like, might be playing something that's, like, angular and janky, like, I almost, like, turned on, like, Barracuda by Heart just to listen to the drum sound and be like, it's not that far off. Like, you know, it's almost just like he walked in the studio, took the exact drum kit that was recorded on that and just played Rorschach shit on it. Like, you know, it doesn't sound like an Obituary record, which is actually a band that they toured with, or, like, Morbid Angel, where you get that, like, clicky sound to, like, everything. It's like, it's very classic rock. You could throw it on a fucking Van Halen record, like, that drum sound. Like, a lot of the instruments, like, yeah, they're playing sour notes and stuff like that, but the production is actually not that far off from a classic rock sound. And
I don't know if we discussed this while we're recording, but this was the last thing that Rorschach put out. This was they called it quits after this.
Yep. And they wrote, I got a quote from Huckins, actually, where he, I could actually read the direct quote, but the last thing I wrote down was, this is a Keith Huckins quote. He said, "Now I can say it was dumb kid shit, but it was mostly down to differences in how to run the band, and all the musical tastes were evolving, just not all in the same direction." You know?
It sounds like that. Like, it sounds like, because, you know, coming into this, I was like, a band like this, is it that every member is coming with their own influences, or is, like, is every member coming with 5 different fucking influences and bring it together and just, like...
And maybe people just weren't ready to go in that direction yet, which is cool when you see them kind of back on the same page when it comes to, like, Kiss It Goodbye, you know, a couple years later. And, I mean, even looking into, like, Nick Forte, the other guitar player, I actually was looking into him a bit. He currently plays guitar in a band called Raspberry Bulbs, which is a Brooklyn-based band. They're a blackened punk band that kind of sounded a bit like Midnight and, like, maybe Devil Master. Like, they could definitely play with those guys now. which I was like, interesting. Okay, so like at the time you have all these like creative differences between the bands, but I'm looking at like what some of these guys ended up doing later, and it's like they came to these conclusions. I had to dig for this one a little bit, but apparently about 10 years ago too, he played in a one-man black metal band called Hamsoken, which only put out one release, but it's a black metal ambient project that sounded like a mixture of like Abruptum, Zather, some of the weirder Leviathan stuff, Black Funeral, and kind of reminded me of like there's a Chinese black metal ambient band called Ennui that it kind of reminded me of. It was like total soundscape, like horror movie type of sounding shit with like weird creepy vocals and shit and everything that would be like totally right up my alley.
Yeah.
And like this is from the guitar player. It was a one-man band.
Yeah.
Like, and it was in '08. He released one EP from it, and that's it. But I was listening to it, and I'm like, I would never guess that this was a member of Rorschach, like, at all.
I mean, a lot of these guys go off and they do like all sorts of like wild projects that you would have, you wouldn't even imagine.
Oh,
you know,
actually, Andrew Gromley plays in a. Well, before.
He was in a Man Alive. No, not what the hell's that band? What are they called? Not Man Alive. No, not Family. It is Man Alive?
He was in Man Alive for a bit. He, like we said, played in Shai Hulud for a bit. He played some live shows with Today Is the Day. He actually was in a thrash band that I couldn't find any of because there's a German band with the same name, but he apparently played in a straight-up thrash metal band called Torment before Rorschach. And now he actually plays in... I found a bunch of live videos from them. They're called Space Bag.
Okay.
A three-piece progressive avant-garde like punk grind band that's like very odd time signatures, very like, you know, kind of reminds me of almost like a more mathy early Gengistron because they had all these like weird techno and glitch influences and stuff like that. Really, really odd shit. And I was like, this is way more technical than anything Rorschach ever did. But yeah, cool. Like, and apparently that band's still very, very active. You know, I was finding like live videos from like a couple months ago of them, you know, with him playing drums on that stuff. And I think it's just him, a guitar player, and a keyboard player that's doing all kinds of electronic stuff. And again, it was like full of weird time signatures and whatnot.
Did you guys happen to catch? So they got back together actually, Rorschach, in 2009.
Yeah, and they played 3 shows in one day. I
remember that. Actually. I forgot about that.
I caught 2 of the 3 shows.
Okay.
They played it
with Indecision, right? One of them was with Indecision, I believe.
That was the show at ABC No Rio, which is the one I didn't catch.
Or it might have been I'm gonna butcher the name. Le Paysan Rouge.
They played with Converge at that show. Which Converge, the tickets went up sale for quite a while, and I bought a ticket because I'm such a Rorschach fan, and they stayed up for a while, and the show didn't sell out. And then Converge, like, if I remember correctly, it was like a week before the show, joined on to open up for Rorschach. The tickets immediately sold out. So that's why the band actually went and played 2 more shows, one at ABC No Rio, and then they played a secret show at the end of the night at the Anchoron. The Anchored Inn.
That's
place.
right. Yep.
And
forgot about that.
So, which was cool because I was literally living like 2-3 blocks from that venue at that time.
Yeah,
Definitely
awesome.
missed that venue.
It was a shithole, but it was fantastic.
Yeah, and like I said, I lived like 2-3 blocks from it, so it was awesome having such a cool metal bar, like so close, and like I'd seen so many cool bands there. You know,
it was like Proto St. Vitus.
Yeah, 100%. You know, like seeing bands like Harvest. And, you know...
That's actually where I met you.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
I met Pat at a show in Brooklyn, and it was probably 2012 or 2013. We were seeing a metalcore band from the 90s called Harvest. That's where I met
took a lot of influence from Rorschach.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they were definitely influenced. I remember seeing Gehenna there, the, like, Midwest Gehenna, not the Norwegian Gehenna, which I would have been actually even a little bit more psyched about. I'm sorry to say. But, you know.
I mean, Gehenna's a wild... I mean, yeah, the...
Both bands, yeah.
Holy Terror Gehenna is a trip.
Norwegian Gehenna was actually definitely one of the first black metal bands to actually use keyboards, and definitely one of the first ones to do it well. So, another great band to check out, too. I think both are totally worth looking into.
Yeah, it's, like, rare, right, when you have, like, one band that, like... Or rather, 2 bands that have the same name. It's usually, like, one of them sucks, but in this case, both Gehennas.
Yeah. I saw Magruder Grind, I think, play there like 3 or 4 times at that same bar, though.
I feel like I probably saw them there.
Because I think the members of Magruder Grind moved to Brooklyn around that time, so they were just playing constantly. And when Europa was still there, too, I think I saw them play there another, like, 2 or 3 times. I remember seeing them there with I Hate God. And, like, I mean, that venue's gone as well.
Yeah.
I saw the Refused play there as well for a reunion, which is pretty awesome.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that did happen. That
Yes.
did happen. I forgot they did their whole...
That was supposed to be an outdoor show, but it got rained out right before, and they moved
Yeah.
it to Europa. And that was one of the last shows they did at Europa, I believe, which was cool. But, yeah.
Just like a second, when you were mentioning that, like, just the sound of this album as a whole, like, kind of different sounds and instruments, like, snaking in and out and everything, I started thinking of fucking Coltrane's Meditations album. And especially the first song on it, because it starts off as, like, slightly recognizable, like this, and then you're like, what the where am I, you know? Like, what is this, what the hell? And it's like, and as soon as it's like, okay, I do not recognize the ground under my feet, just they start pushing in, like, oh, I can hear this horn.
Is that one of those
now.
later Coltrane's where he starts getting into, like, world music and stuff, where it's not just, like, completely sax-based, or is it still...
Yeah, okay, so it's not exactly world music stuff, it's more just, like, pure fucking chaos, and it's crazy, like, the song specifically is called, I think it's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, or the Holy Ghost, one of those. And it's just wild. It's fucking falls apart in the middle, but it's like every note, it's like screaming. It sounds like the horns are screaming. And
So
like,
it makes you dissociate, then it brings you back down to earth.
yeah, just calmly. Like the fucking end of this album.
Yeah. His trajectory, though, I mean, it's been years since I really did a deep dive on Coltrane, but, like, a lot of his, like, later stuff is, like... It's almost like he just starts pulling in some of those instruments that you associate with world music. It's no longer like traditional like jazz instruments. He starts pulling in all kinds of like odd things, but also like deconstructing them and using them in like odd ways and shit. So that's why I was curious, like, because you have like him deconstructing still sax based, and then you have like deconstructing with like a fucking didgeridoo and fucking whatever the fuck, like, you know, like just completely, you know, breaking your fucking dreadlocks apart.
I mean, it's so
know?
interesting to see how much also that like just oh man, I mean, just jazz in general, and like how much it lends itself to like a lot of the more kind of creative records that came in like hardcore, metalcore, punk, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And how it sort of lends itself to that. It's just incredible to me, and maybe maybe we'll do more of a deep dive on sort of that.
Yeah,
maybe one day. I mean, why not?
Yeah, I'm totally open to that. I did write some notes for like the track Traditional, track 3 that I was talking about.
Yeah.
Is I think it was interesting how like it's sporadic gear shifting, but there's like moments in that track in particular where it almost goes like it's one of the few times where it goes almost like major key, where it sounds like a kind of positive riff, but it's very quick, and they almost make it like, I got the feeling where it was almost like thumbing their nose at like typical punk bands. Like it was like nah 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 nah, like, you know, playing with these like almost typical punk tropes, but then fucking with them, and it's just like it sounded like just snot nosed to like everybody who wanted to be like typical punk rock stuff. There's even the 1 2 3 4 count in it that's like very typical punk, but it's all done like super perverted. It's like, you know, which is funny because like punk has such like a reputation for being like a perverted anti-music, so it's like to hear this band that's then taking like the solidified like textbook tropes of what has now become like typical punk, and like again like making fun of it and like deconstructing it and like, you know, like out edgelording the punks, you know, like that was like the whole, and it seemed ironic to me that it was called Traditional. Like that seemed like getting that feeling about the track. I thought that was very interesting that was the title, because
I think that touches like how intentional everything is on this album. There's even like going into there's like a bass part in one of the songs that almost, it's like foreshadows a bass solo and then in the middle of another song, and just like how this band deals with like precision and exactness, but that it's still vile and bass, reminds me of 120 Days of Sodom, you know, because like everyone in that book has like a specific way that they need to get off, but it's still like it's it's still bass and vile and like dirty, you know, and like and violent and everything there, but like it's exact and
it's very particular.
They know exactly like perfect how to do it, and that's the impressive part, because like it just still goes back to like this point in my mind. It's like, you know, how do you write something that's like, it sounds like it's chaotic, disjointed, doesn't connect with each other, you know, like there's nothing there that's holding it together. But then again, it might be the fucking drummer that
there
really
is a foundation there. There's, I mean, I think you really have to listen to it, but that's why I keep bringing the drummer up, because I do think that it's there. I mean, just throughout the whole record, there's a collective tightness here.
And actually, I feel like though these two tracks, traditional and then the next one, drawn and quartered, I wrote like these are probably the most like straightforward punk tracks on it. Not that they're very like straightforward, but if you're gonna pick like ones that give you almost something to hold on to, I was like, but I was feeling like, you know, the drums are holding everything together, but there's like, it's like almost like the beginning of a bad drug trip, like when you're just starting to realize that something's wrong. You know, like it's just off enough, and you're like, "Fuck, this is gonna be a bad ride." Like I don't know if I'm ready for this. Like
you know, pulled in anyway.
That's what I wrote. Like you know, it's like when you first start realizing, like, dude, I'm really gonna get put through the fucking ringer, aren't I? And like, I really, this was a vibe that I get, I think, a lot with Dead Guy. That I think I also got with Rorschach, was this kind of like also feeling of like, you know, growing up and getting this disillusionment of like working and like being confined to like a fucking cubicle or a warehouse or like, you know, these kind of things, and like kind of like you're listening to these old school, like, I don't know, it reminds me of like working in a warehouse and like you're listening to all these old school punk records, but your brain is going a million miles an hour. You're hopped up on caffeine. You're just trying to like get through fucking life. You're miserable. You're fucking just like depressed and all these other things. And you're just like listening to these like if you tried to make music of like you listening to Minor Threat while your brain's doing a million miles an hour on way too much fucking caffeine and just like try to play that's probably what these two tracks would sound like. You know, it's like miserable, too much caffeine, but listening to Minor Threat and trying to like, you know, stack cardboard boxes, like, you know, is probably what it would sound like.
That's just giving me a lot of anxiety just even thinking about, like, just because of the whole I mean, let's just talk about, like, I guess Fixation on a Coworker, Dead Guy, and how the whole theme of that record, I mean, it's right in the title. It's just like, you're like, I know that guy.
Yep.
I fucking know that guy that they're, you know, trying to portray here. Like, I know that fucking guy.
Saying so much.
It's a nauseous feeling.
Saying so much in just, like, even that record title.
Right.
You know, like...
It's sort of like being, like, there's like, you know, you have this existential kind of, like, feeling, like, also with, you got, you know, trapped in materiality. And you have all of this, like, kind of together and, like, ugh. It's just... That's just a gross record, and I love when bands kind of like dive into that kind of shit. Also, Swans does a lot of shit like that.
Yeah, Swans obviously pulling from that like super industrial sound, like in a much more overt way, you know.
But like fucking with your head, like really getting, like trying to go past your ego and really trying to just
And I mean, like, I don't use industrial as
plant
as,
eggs
like,
in your brain.
I don't use industrial as in like what that term has come to mean. I mean, like, as in like you hear a lot of the early industrial artists, or even Black Sabbath, talking about that, like, their sound was influenced by, like, the jobs that they were working.
Stress of
like,
work culture.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, I mean, Naomi talking about getting his fucking fingers cut off by, like, a sheet metal press.
Right.
Like, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like, and it's not, you know, it's not even a critique of, like, particularly, like, work itself, because, I mean, work could be a million things. You could be doing, like, you know, work on yourself or having private individual projects, which is interesting that we do this podcast, too, because I think all three of us have our individual projects that we kind of like work at too, to kind of like be separate from the workforce, but still making a living.
100%.
You know what I mean?
And I think that comes out different. Like, I don't know if I could produce this music this way, because like your life experiences come through.
Yes. And
I think that's the interesting thing, because like, you know, a band like Converge takes from predominantly from bands like Rorschach and Today Is the Day. But I feel like the vibe is completely different.
Yes.
You don't get, like, like Converge has this more like artsier feel because like you know you're getting a band where these guys are doing art for a living.
Yes.
You don't get that vibe from Rorschach. You get this vibe where there's this like pent up, I need to do this because I don't get this out in my normal life.
Like active shooter in the office kind of shit.
100%. And like Today is the Day has that fucking like, you know, like,
please, we could
like
do
prepper type of like
we could do like a fucking 5-part series just on Steve Austin alone.
You know, like
that dude
like,
is fascinating.
100%. And like I'm totally with doing that. Like let's go down that rabbit hole. But like so like Rorschach is going postal in the workplace, and like fucking Today is the Day is like, you know, school shooter type of shit.
Or,
like, you know,
like even like I would even say it's just like fucking like just day to day, just like pent up like isolated anxiety kind of like almost like a sense of even a sense of like clinical paranoia.
Yeah, and I'm not at all trying to glorify any of this stuff, but it's just like, you know, this stuff is like
it's commentary. It's all commentary.
It's also like, you know, it's an outlet, you know, like these are healthy outlets for like things that people think about and you get to turn it into art and allow it to like actually have some place to live in a positive.
Yes,
totally.
Right. Instead of inflicting that in some cowardly way.
Exactly.
Of course.
100%. You get to like turn this into something that then like can help other people because like, you know, the best art fucking comforts people and allows them to feel like they're not fucking alone.
Exactly. Like, things like, oh shit, like, oh, it's not just me.
100%. Yeah. And it's like, if people find healthy outlets for those things and whatnot, that's how you cure and like stop things like that from fucking happening.
I think so too. It's a different kind of therapy in a way.
100%.
You know what I mean?
You know, it's a cathartic kind of thing.
And I think it's important that like, you know, stuff like that and imagery like that, as disturbing as it is to look at, it's important that it's out there because it was given like that's sort of like the channels it traveled through to you know, for to relieve that kind of stress, you know, and make these things not, you know, a reality, but also I think these things also serve as a warning. They absolutely serve as a, you know, a warning. And honestly, when I listen to like Rorschach and I listen to Dead Guy and I listen to Kiss It Goodbye, I got this feeling in my stomach where I'm like, fuck, like I don't want to be trapped in an office for 20 years.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to be fucking pushing papers for us, man. Not that there's anything. Listen, you do what you got to do to get through the day and stuff like that, but like for me it was a big fucking wake-up call, and it actually radicalized me in a way to try making a living for myself, just using the skills that I have and build other skills just so that I could have complete fucking ownership.
In a lot of ways, I think hardcore and metalcore is a vehicle for people in their 20s to give advice to people in their teens. You know, like through music.
That's
you know, you're just a couple years ahead of the people that you're playing to. So it's like, you know, it's like it's almost like these guys are just telling the obvious, probably younger people, mostly in the crowd, like, you know, hey, be wary, like, this shit is right around the corner. Like, you know?
I found these records when I was like 19, 20 years old.
Yeah.
So,
you know, like,
you know, like,
so that's what I'm saying. Like, you know, like it's typical metalcore. Like, you get these 25, 26-year-olds warning the 15, 16-year-olds, like, hey, it's right around the fucking corner.
Yeah.
You know?
Make your choices now. You know, as far as just like, find the alternative, like, do something that's just going to, you know, give you fulfillment. And also just like knowing that there's other channels to be able to do something too, not to, you know, skew this sort of episode into like kind of career advice or anything that, but it's important to know.
For nothing. I mean, I think
it's important.
They totally appropriately could have changed the music, even though it's fucking iconic and perfect the way it is in like Office Space when they're beating the shit out of the copy machine. They could have put it to a Rorschach or Dead Guy song as much as they put it to what was that, like the Ghetto Boys or something like that, I think it was. The fucking, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like iconic, that whole scene and everything like that. But I feel like, you know, for the vibe that these guys gave off, they totally could have been beating the shit out of that copy machine to a track off of Protestant, you know?
Yeah.
Like, the next track, I actually thought was interesting because it was Shanks.
Yeah.
Which,
Shanks is cool.
I, obviously got a little chuckle because I was just thinking about One Piece the whole time. I was like, how does this relate to One Piece? A little confused, but no, again though, it seemed like as much as like track 3 and track 4 seemed like to be playing with typical punk tropes, I heard a lot more of the classic rock kind of tropes.
Okay.
You know, and that kind of stuff, and again, perverting it and like fucking it up and making it, which was something that I felt like Black Flag did with, like, you listen to Slip It In, I'm like, this is just, like, evil Van Halen, like, totally.
Evil Van Halen?
Yeah.
Sounds like...
Van Halen's evil enough. Don't need Black.
what the fucking guy says, like, oh, fucking, Black Sabbath is too heavy for me or some shit like that.
Yeah.
Oh, no, Slayer was too heavy for me.
We came across, we were vending at an event, and, like, I'm not even going to get into it.
Slayer's too heavy, man.
He said Slayer is too heavy for him, but he talked to us about some stuff that gave the implication that like maybe Slayer was not too heavy for him. I don't know. It was weird. It was a weird dude. Completely disjointed kind of story that I'm not going to get into right now.
I mean,
dude was a character.
You took like the rock aspect from it. It's like this. My only note for this one, aside from going off on the fucking Marquis de Sade shit, like I was like, this is 100% indecision.
Okay. Yeah.
That's what hit me for this. And then it's like every other track after this was like, oh, this is this sound, this is this sound, this is this sound. Like it would really just be interesting to like sit, especially with like the bands that I don't know or connected to them, and be like, were you listening to this? Like, what kind of influence did this have on you? Or if it's like, for people that it's like you're in like, your standard hardcore or your standard this or that, and you want to do something opposite. So it's like you have this bass, you can only like go off of the bass. So I wonder if it's like when people are trying to do something different, like they just kind of get into avenue, like, there's set avenues to go to sound wise, especially if you're branching off of something. I wonder if it's like if they, even if they didn't have direct influence, just the idea of wanting to do something different, they fall into the same space.
And not to like, kind of break the fourth wall, but it's like that's why I appreciate like podcasts and shit like that now, where we're able to do stuff like this, because like in the past you sit there and you're like, oh, I wish I could know like how these things are connected, but it's like now we have these like much more
information,
available,
so many different perspectives, and so many different kinds of people that have been involved.
That we could log this information and allow people to like reference it again and be like, that there was this connection here. So now when like brand new bands keep piling on, like we can kind of have this checkpoint for where people were at in this point in time.
Sure.
Even talking about these bands that are now fucking 25 years old, 30 years old. So, the next track is
Hemlock?
No, Recurring Nightmare number 105, which all I wrote down for that one was total late Black Flag jam. And then that was the one where I was kind of feeling like I don't feel like they would listen to jam bands, but I feel like this was the Grateful Dead kind of jam band, Allman Brothers shit coming through Black Flag, seeing the most, where it's like they were getting secondhand jam band influence on this track in particular, So that was really all I wrote for this track, but I don't know if you guys have any more thoughts.
I mean, like I said, I actually didn't have, tracks listed. I was listening to it as a whole cohesive piece.
But it really is, though. Yeah. I mean, like, after that, I jumped back in at Blinders.
Okay. Blinders is the very next track. So.
Right, and that's the first track on side B.
Yep, side B.
It was like, with that one, like I said before, it's like, that's where it was like a death rock scrams to me, and then it's like dissonant crumbling, it's like spaz-ish, and then it's like a just torturous and fucking drawn out, and like I'm sitting there like,
well, it's got that creepy ass intro, kind of like clean, kind of just unsettling.
It's like, I have here this a masochistic intrigue, and it's like, why am I sitting here putting myself in this fucking album?
Yeah.
But I'm not going to turn it off. Like, there's enough going on.
That intro and the bass playing on this actually reminded me a lot of like one of my favorite kind of bass sound bands, which like I know I'm a huge fan of, is like Dystopia and that kind of stuff.
Oh, sure.
Same kind of like vibe. I immediately like thought of that. Like,
that's interesting, actually. I think Dystopia would be relevant here.
Yeah,
even thematically.
Yeah,
even thematically, absolutely, I would throw Dystopia in here. I don't know if that's
but I think the bass in that band in particular is like a large portion of their creepy, off-putting vibe.
Oh, Dystopia,
and the way that the bass is used here is in very much the same way to the same effect.
It's that like nasty tone.
Yeah,
nasty tone.
And weird, odd choices of like notes and like the pattern to them, where it's like. It's off kilter, like what could almost be a nice strummed out acoustic pattern, but then like 2 or 3 notes are changed to make the entire thing like off kilter and like, you know, not quite sit right, you know? A few sour notes, you know, it's like milk that's like 3 days old, you know, 3 days past expiration date, you know? Like,
you could still maybe digest it. You might be okay. You might
give it a try. Push it.
Yeah, fuck it. You know, like, at least it's been in the fridge, you know? Hemlock, next track. This one is, I think, is the biggest drums. Like,
one of my favorites
shining.
on here too.
You know, like
sure.
the time signature changes are just fucking constant every direction.
It punches
like,
you.
Yeah.
It fucking punches you.
How many times can we just change fucking gears like all erratically? Like, you know, most disjointed track, I think, by far on the whole record.
I would say so. I mean, like, that's where another drop point mentally, and then I pop back in at Raw Nerve. Mm-hmm. But then it's like, just with that, like, Hemlock is like, that's a poison, right?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah, no, Hemlock,
so,
it's a flower.
Yeah.
It comes from flower, I think. And it's like, if you eat hemlock, you'll fucking die, I believe. Like,
and
it's
that's what
poisonous.
Socrates was poisoned with.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
It's like one of my favorite paintings, actually, is like, there's a painting called The Death of Socrates. Yeah. And it's like, there's all these people, like, it's this big dramatic scene at one far side of the painting, and you see this other figure, actually, at the other side of the painting is all off to himself. And he looks very sad, very somber, away from all the drama, because you have all these, like, politicians and people, like, throwing things in the air, and they look all dramatic. And then, again, like, almost in the darkness, like, completely alone in this misery and solitude, this other figure. And that figure's Plato.
Yeah.
Plato, all off to his own, like, you know, like my mentor. Like, you know, not taking part in all the drama and making a big spectacle out of it, off on his own, just miserable. On a side note, that's just, like, one of my favorite paintings from art history. But, you know, like, that's, I think, where most people in history and contextually think of, like, hemlock is, you know, as a poison, being, like, you know, what Socrates ate for corrupting the children, you know? So.
Beautiful flowers, though.
Yeah. A lot like opium.
Yeah.
Makes me think about just, like, the, you know, a note on the album as a whole. The song titles are kind of just, like, worlds in themselves, you know? Like, I'll look at, like...
And they're not too wordy.
Yeah, no, but
like, they're very
fucking awesome.
To the point, I like it.
Like, they're things that, like, get in and, like an infection, make me want something from the thing itself. Like, fucking Skin Culture as a title.
That's a track. That track, too.
Like, I wanna,
Great.
like, give me, like, a book or anything, like, name that. I want to see, like, that as a thing, its title developed into something else. Just, like, fucking
it's funny because my head almost goes in, like, a Lovecraftian body horror, like, Uzumaki kind of direction, like, hearing that title. But, like, you know, I feel like you can go so many places with that. But I
you talk about porn, too.
Yeah.
Skin culture.
Yeah.
You know? Who
knows?
knows?
That's where my brain goes into, like, that immediate, like, body horror kind of direction. But, you know, which even, you know, you could see porn in that kind of way as well, you know?
Porn is body horror. That's insane, actually.
Porn is body horror.
So, yeah, it's like filthy. Like the song titles themselves are, like, they're kind of disgusting.
Yeah, like kind of a nauseous, kind of like discomforting feeling, you know? But not too overblown to make you kind of roll your eyes where it's like edgy.
Yeah.
Like it's just enough discomfort, you know what I mean? Where it's not really edgy. It's just like, oh, that's icky.
Yeah.
That doesn't make me feel right.
And like that, again, that whole, you know, it's just enough that it doesn't push over the edge.
Yeah. And that's important,
itself.
keeping that needle right in the center where it's not too much, but it, you know, it's not too little where it doesn't have enough punch.
Yeah.
And then all these titles, when you put them, you know, at the top of a list, you bring them all the way to the bottom. It's interesting to see, like, I mean, I don't think that this is like a concept record or anything like that, but it is interesting that the record itself is called Protestant.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Because
also, like, super
there's no
thought-provoking.
There's no track called Protestant, though. But the record's called Protestant, and then it's got all these different tracks.
Well, I mean, that might be a critique.
You know?
I take it to be a critique on the punk and hardcore scene, because you think about, like, you know, like the Protestant Reformation, like, you know, here's my kind of like, you know, this is my rebellion and kind of like push back to the Orthodox, you know, and you know, that sort of thing. It's like, I think that rebellious nature is kind of like, you know, cutting back, you know, it's the Electric Church, man, you know?
Yeah, it's the Electric Church. And here we are.
What about Raw Nerve? You guys got any thoughts on Raw Nerve, the next track?
Said prime power violence and emo violence, and actually at the end of it where he yells "fuck," that Indecision does that, you know, and it's like,
and
oh,
Ceremony does that as well.
There we
like,
go.
You know,
Yo, so it's like
violence is like full of moments like that.
Like
Celebrity Murders does it too. Artie Philly Band.
Yeah.
So also Indecision related.
See, I'm actually, as much as I'm sure a lot of these bands are aware of this kind of stuff. I mean, like, for instance, that Ceremony release, they were super young, so I wonder if like they're getting it from Indecision or something like that. Or
I feel like Ceremony. I mean, I could be wrong here. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I feel like Ceremony that's a whole different biome of like kind of like hardcore and punk.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's probably just something passed on. It's like the influences that are unconscious that you just
right.
You
well, there's that too that we're
up,
talking about before too,
exactly.
with like Hawkins and stuff like that. Yeah.
I wrote with that there was so many bass sour notes on this, and it sounds at moments like the bass player is half a count ahead of the rest of the band, like he's playing a little too fast, you know, like, and it makes you feel like anxious and panicky throughout like the whole track because that bass is so driving and it's a little bit ahead of everybody else, and you get so used to basses usually shining in the sludgier, slower sections, so it was interesting to hear a quicker track that was obviously like the bass was cutting through everything so much, because you don't usually hear that. Like usually the bass gets drowned out immediately once the band kind of picks up and everything else, but like it was cutting right through. And again, it's because of like the bass was almost acting antithetical, to the rest of the band, like throughout the entire track. It's like, it's like, not that the rest of the band was very like orderly and put together sounding, but it's like, almost like they're falling down two separate staircases, like 3/4 of the band is falling down one stair set, and like I'm gonna go fall down that other stair set over here.
Sure.
So a little quicker, just throw yourself down.
Yeah, exactly.
Gentlemen, I'll be right back.
Cool. So the next one is Skin Culture.
Yeah.
And I kind of was looking forward to talking about this track.
I mean, this is what I found really reminded me of that French band Martyr Whore.
Okay.
And it's just like this sounds, or like this fucking like buzzing, needling ass guitar thing where I'm not like, I can't like not pay attention to it, but I also have no idea what the fuck is going on. Like that whole atmosphere of it, and then just like everything driving, like it doesn't, nothing on it feels connected to me, but then that's like the connectivity of it, right? Like, so it's like the whole idea of like, like a community of individuals type shit, Yeah. What you get on this one? What you feel for Skin Culture?
I was gonna say, like, as we were talking about earlier, what your favorite track is. I kind of have two for two totally different reasons. This is one of them, like by far. Like that opening riff is like everything to me. If that's all this record had to give, that's a lot. Because like I just love that fucking riff. Like, and it's funny because it's like it's a lot like in a lot of ways, because I found myself sitting there and re-listening to it over and over again and trying to figure out who it reminds me of, what song it reminds me of, because it sounds like so familiar, but then kind of done in a fucked up way. But you want to like trace it back and be like, what does that remind me of? And like that's something that like a band like Pig Destroyer does for me all the time. Yeah. But you can't actually trace it back to anything. They almost like, it's this weird, like, almost like vaporwave type of thing where they're like giving you a nostalgia you never had.
Yeah, the absolute fucking false nostalgia, but that's also like, it's like a weird like futurism perversion where it's like it's connected to something, but it's so fucking destroyed and distorted that you're not exactly sure.
But like I swear, even if you put it on now, my brain is immediately going to go to work. It's like, where is that fucking like we know something that is like so damn close to that, but I can't figure it out. And it drives me nuts, and I'm like, it's kind of fucking genius, because it like that increases the anxiety even more, because I'm just sitting there and flipping through the vast catalog of like music from my entire fucking life, trying to figure out where I feel like I know that riff from. That's fucking awesome. Like, we're talking about that opening riff from Skin Culture. So.
Yeah,
it's a problem.
It's it's one of my favorite tracks on the record for sure.
I was gonna say it's my favorite track.
It's fucking evil,
with the exception of one other, which we'll talk about in a bit, which I like for a totally different reason. But I definitely would say this is probably my favorite and the standout track from this record for me. You know, I just think that whole riff is like iconic. It's, you know. So, do you guys have anything else to say about that track?
Nah, I mean, I got nothing.
I think if unless you're a huge, I would say if you're a humongous Converge fan, maybe start from Mandible, the first track.
Yeah.
Because I think that's, you know, a lot of people that's going to probably be the band that they would have the most reference for. But if you're coming into this band totally cold, I might say start with Skin Culture. I mean, if you just want to like check out one track off of this to see if it's for you, like that track will probably hook most people, I think.
I think that's fair. I think that's a fair assessment, honestly.
You know, and if you like what you're kind of hearing on that, I might go back. And then, you know, I think if I was even trying to get somebody into this band coldly, not knowing anything they were into, I'd probably give them Skin Culture and maybe the 21st Century Schizoid Man cover. And I would be like, all right, if you're intrigued, go deeper, you know?
Right.
Which they played that live, the 21st Century Schizoid Man cover. If I remember correctly, I think they played it twice, maybe even 3 times when I saw them at the Acheron.
I remember them covering My War, but they cover My War recorded too.
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
That's a regular one that they cover.
Yeah,
like consistently. So, you know, I think they're like known for working that into most sets.
Yeah.
So, which is fucking awesome. So we have track 11 is I believe that's the next one because yeah, Skin Culture was 10. So Cut the Wheel is 11. Do you guys have any thoughts on that one?
I didn't have anything for Cut the Wheel.
I actually thought that if the record could take one track cut, it would probably be this one.
Cut the track?
Yeah.
I think that's...
Cut the wheel?
I've always considered, like, when you have an album and there's one song that you're like, on it, then it's a perfect album. Because it has that, like...
It's not a bad track.
Yeah.
No, I mean, nothing on here is a bad track.
I feel like almost every song has a definitive, new, unique idea, and I feel like this song almost reiterates a lot of the other ideas on this record.
Okay.
You know? So it's like it doesn't really give me anything new. It just kind of, like, summarizes what we've already heard.
Mm-hmm.
So, which compared to most bands, I mean, like, especially at the time, like, this is still a very unique left field sound. You know, like, you're not getting other bands that sound like this.
Right.
So, but that said, though, I feel like almost every track up until now has given me something new. You know, and this is the first one that I haven't felt like gave me a new idea to chew on.
Yeah. It's like a repetitive...
And maybe that's in part having to do with the track order itself. Like, maybe if it was earlier in the record, maybe you'd feel differently. Just food for thought.
That's true. And I'd like to maybe go back and pull out individual tracks to maybe see if it was a different order. Maybe I would feel differently about it. But, you know, just listening to it as it is, and especially, I almost feel like it was put there because Skin Culture has that fucking really punchy ass fucking riff, and then the track we're gonna go to next, Mandible, is so fucking different and like such a change of direction. They almost felt like they wanted to give you something that was predictable in between, because, you know, you get that barn burner track followed by a really out there weird abstract track.
Mandible's the first track on side A, correct?
Ornament.
Ornaments.
Yeah.
Ornaments, not
okay.
Mandible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
Ornaments.
Do you feel like this is an album that you can listen to, like just pull out tracks and listen to, or like randomize?
I think it really depends. It was interesting what Pat was just saying about if you had to recommend like one song or like 2 songs to get someone into Rorschach. I think I would have a really hard time picking one. I think Skin Culture is a strong one. Mandible's also a strong one. I also really like Blinders. I think Hemlock is a good one too to show. But
yeah, actually, those are like my standout tracks, I feel like.
But then Drawn and Quartered is also sick. Like, I have a really hard time coming across like one track.
See, Drawn and Quartered, like, again, I wrote down that was, I thought, a little bit more straightforward than a lot of the other tracks. So maybe that would be a good move for somebody not to like not throw them completely to the fucking
right.
You know.
That's something that's been hard over the years too. It's funny, since we're on this topic, is that like, you know, it's like you have that one friend who like might be completely outside of what you listen to, and you try to like kind of get them into something, and you try to figure out, well, what's the starting point? Because if you just throw them with the most obscure thing, they're going to be completely turned off.
Not for nothing, Rorschach might not be the starting point.
No, Rorschach is not the starting point. And also, I feel like the reason why like like we started this podcast too, was to also pick out these important kind of like weird records. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe we'll do something more like quote unquote, maybe a little more run of the mill. I don't know. I mean, I don't know the direction that would.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, like for episode 1, that we did something that was a bit out of the ordinary, and something that like
that's canon for the three of us, but not to most people.
But not to most people, but also like you know, detailing the influence that this record had too. I mean, amongst like multiple different genres.
Yeah.
Multiple different genres,
and
sure.
Keith Hawkins talk about this, and like he was kind of joking about it, like a little bit about how like that kind of like we're your favorite band's favorite band, and we're your like critics' favorite band, but like regular people, the kids at shows, like he's like, yeah, we're not selling out any fucking venues and that kind of shit.
Right.
Like, you know, he's like, yeah, you like the average fan could give a fuck about like us or Dead Guy. Like,
but that's what I love. I
or...
love about these records in particular is that like it's just kind of esoteric in a way.
Yeah, and in a way, I forgot to mention this earlier when I saw them at La Passion Rouge when Converge joined that show. Converge got on stage and they were like, listen, everybody, like, I know a lot of you here to see us, but, like, this band would not fucking exist if not for Rorschach.
I remember that, yeah, Jake saying that, yeah.
And, like, still, though, when Converge finished playing, like, at least half the room cleared out. So Converge played to half the room after, like, Jake poured his heart out, basically telling everyone, like, listen, you stupid fucks. Yeah. Like,
right.
Do not fucking leave this venue after we play. Because, like, these guys deserve your fucking... And still half the people fucking left, you know? Like...
That's what I appreciate about Converge, though, because, like, they're all people who... It's so evident that they themselves have, like, such good taste in music.
Yes.
And that they're influenced by a lot of really good... obscure shit, and that they're always on point, you know what I mean?
Not for nothing, they just came out with that Blood Moon project with Chelsea Wolfe.
With Chelsea Wolfe, right.
Which is really interesting because I shot photos of Chelsea Wolfe for first time ever playing Brooklyn, and got to meet those guys, and Ben Chisholm, her guitar player, and that kind of stuff, and everything else on The Grime and the Glow, which was like her first full length, if you don't count the like country record she did when she was 16 that she doesn't even acknowledge.
No, it's just
but
not
it was like
canon,
her first tour,
according to her anyway. So.
And I mean, she was still using the veil, like wouldn't even. And I first found her right before that because of Jake Bannon on like a playlist that he put together, and he was talking her up, and like it's crazy to see that like over 10 years later.
Right now they're collabing.
They're collabing and doing a project together. And,
that's also I think the guys from a couple of the guys from Cave In are also involved in that Blood Moon project too.
Yeah, super cool.
Yeah.
Like, you know. And I found so many cool bands over the years, like through the guys in Converge and whatnot. You know, whether that be playlists they've put together, bands they've name dropped in interviews, or just looking at like who is Kurt Ballou currently producing right now in his fucking studio. You know, you check out just about anything he's working on, and you're like, you know, or how many fucking bands is like Ben playing in on fucking drums?
That whole Venn diagram of that time in not to get off track too much, but that whole Venn diagram of bands that were around like the New England, Boston area. I mean, you had like Hydra Head Records, you had Aaron Turner, like all that stuff. Huge. The art direction with all that stuff was just like so fucking special, and it's such a shame that shit isn't around.
If somehow there's anybody listening right now that's still sticking with us through all this like thick, dense nerd shit, and you're wondering how you start getting into this stuff, or you're into this kind of stuff and you want to find some new material, you're feeling kind of like a dead end, go to the Hydra Head catalog. Go find the old stuff and just scroll through and just pick something randomly. They put out so much stuff.
So much.
That, like, is so obscure. But, like, Aaron Turner was such a good, like, taste maker. He knew good shit. So, like, you could just scroll through their stuff, pick something that has some weird-ass name, pick it up. It's going to be fucking awesome. Like, you just... That's something I'll do when I'm feeling, like, plugged up and, like, I need some new music. I'll just, like, let me go to the old Hydra Head catalog.
Right.
I'll just randomly fucking scroll, pick a record, and listen to that, and it ends up being, like, boom, like, holy shit.
Or even just the Black Sabbath cover series they did.
Yeah.
Holy shit. Like, some of those covers are, like, Converge does Snowblind, Neurosis does Children of the Grave.
Very ironic that Converge would do Snowblind.
Yeah.
You know, a straight-edge band doing a song about doing cocaine.
Right.
Always great.
But man, I mean, some of those covers are fucking fantastic. I think, the Today is the Day, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, I think is on there. Which is
dude, I
my favorite.
I love that.
It's just, that's my favorite Sabbath cover right there.
That's my favorite Sabbath song. So, like, hearing one of my favorite kind of like...
With, like, the high gain vocals and everything like that. Just
incredible.
Yeah.
That kind of shit was made for them, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And, like, fucking awesome. But let's talk about Ornaments.
Yes.
Last track.
I think it's a shit post track. Like, as in, like, it's perfect, you know, like, the whole time listening to it on the first listen and everything, and I was like, you know, they can obviously fucking play, and then it's like, then they just show off that they can play, like, your normal shit, if they wanted to. But like they're just choosing to make like this bugged out like schizo hardcore shit for, you know, just like just to do it. And like that was like, that's the fun aspect of it. Like it's such like a, like if this whole album had me in like a trance or a certain feeling, this is the one where I was like, wait, what happened, you know? And like
pulled you back out.
Yeah. And then that's like the you know, sit you back down on like kind of solid ground feeling.
Sure. You
know, it's definitely a cool one, I would say.
Hell yeah.
You have any thoughts, Anthony?
You know, by the time like I'm at this point in the record, like I've already picked out my favorite tracks, and I mean I have to say my favorite track is not Ornaments. I mean I already said what my favorite tracks are, and they're Blinders, they're Mandible, they're Hemlock, Drawn and Quartered, Skin Culture. Not that it's a bad track, but like, I don't know. I almost feel like it could have closed a little bit differently, but like it's also fine. Like I said, nothing on this record is bad. Like it's an incredible fucking record. I guess maybe Ornaments just doesn't have enough punch for me as like the other kind of. But that could just be a taste thing too. That could just be my own personal preferences and what I listen
See,
for.
that's why I wanted to say, because this is actually my other favorite off of this record. Skin Culture and this. That's what I'm saying. That's why I got two favorites that are totally different. But I listen to this and I'm like, I wish I had a whole record of tracks like this.
Yeah.
You know, like this is so mood setting, fucking weird, and this reflects more of what I listen to on a regular basis.
Okay.
Like I seek out bands like that are just like creepy, eerie, almost like soundtracky.
Yeah.
And I also have a tendency, like when I think back on like a lot of records that like I like, a lot of times I like the standout weirdo tracks. Like I'm that guy who likes Seekers of Truth on, you know, Age of Quarrel. Okay. I'm that guy who also likes I'm the One on Best Wishes. Like, you know, like I like all those fucking tracks that are
I like 4 songs on Best Wishes, and it's the ones that everyone else likes. Crush a Demoniac, Down But Not Out, Age of Quarrel, Death Camps.
I mean, like
that's it. That's Best Wishes for me.
With like an album like this, like how do you? I think it's kind of the perfect way to end it.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah.
But I wanted more. And the funny thing is I'm sitting there and I'm like, most people listen to this and probably are like, fuck this shit, the record's over. And I'm like,
just cut off before.
You know, I'm like, dude, keep rolling the credits, man. Like, let's go. Like, I want to.
I'm here for the you know, the Marvel Cinematic Universe fucking post credit scene, right?
Dude, I want to just watch that part of Star Wars where the fucking you're just going into the stars for like forever.
What's the weird guy still doing in the theater?
Exactly. Yeah, no, I fucking love this track. Like,
yeah.
But I totally understand why people wouldn't. But like, you know, I completely, and I wish that that there was like an EP or something like that where they just explored like shit like this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that would have been cool.
Right.
You know.
I think, you know, I think of like Georges Bataille and like his idea of the summit and decline, and you know the decline after the absolute peak and fucking ruptured annihilation of the summit. It's like the decline is when like you have like order again. You know, it's almost like the, you know, the profane of that whole sacred experience, and like things come back together. You know, and sets you up. But like it's also, you need that to get to the chaos of the next thing, you know? Like,
sure, because you can't just be at the summit the
again.
whole time. You got to dip down and then climb back up.
It's fucking endless.
Yeah.
The entire album is endless.
Right.
You know, it's endless and torturous. And I think, you know, like my two favorite on here are, I would say, is like Mandible and not Skin Culture, Blinders, right? Yeah. But then like this is the standout, and like the standout thing in Experience is like that weird other, you know. So
if you think about it narratively, I almost think of this as like if we go back to that like kind of like working life kind of thing, I feel like maybe this is when it's dark and you're alone at the end of the workday and you're just kind of like coping with your existence before you go to sleep.
You got the racing thoughts.
You know? Yeah. Like, it's that lonesome desperation in your, like, single bedroom apartment.
Shit, alarm
Kind of,
alarm says I gotta get up in 3 hours.
Yeah,
and do it all over again.
You know, 'cause, yeah, there's like all the creepy like lyrics too that are like kind of spoken with like talking about like prescription pills and shit like that and everything else like on the fuck. Yeah, it's just it's creepy. It's like lonely. It's like desperate sounding. You know, it's and the scream vocals with like the very like chilled out kind of like much more subdued instruments below it, you know, like it sounds very like desperate and like crying out for fucking help kind of thing, you know. It's a little chilling, you know. So the last thing I think I wanted to go into that was like a glaring thing is maybe talk about the aesthetics of this record, like with what we have sitting right here.
Cover, like I remember seeing, I was like, but then like just like that like oddness of it, and it feels like it's like not a part, like it feels like it's something different from the album.
It's very primitive from what I understand too. I think
actually primitive is one of the notes I have for the sound of this thing, so that's
I think most of the guys in the band, it's not any particular person, I think, to my knowledge, but I think most of the people in the band had a hand in kind of designing the cover and then also the insert.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if you've seen the record itself, it's maybe it was just a couple of photos that because I you know, I don't have an original copy or anything like that, but it doesn't even have like it's so crude. It's just this white piece of wax. And it's got Roman numerals on each side, and that's it. Just almost like just etched in there.
It's weird too because like the band is very, very intentional with their aesthetics. They're very, very like they're known for being like a band that like puts together like a really nice looking package, and like it's different than all their other stuff. Yeah. You know, it doesn't look like I think most people, the band included, really like the way that the needle pack kind of 7-inch, you know, the aesthetics on that. But, you know, you could even look at Dead Guy and Kiss It Goodbye and all that kind of stuff and everything else. Like, all of those bands have very intentional aesthetics.
Well, Dead Guy and Kiss It Goodbye, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Tim Singer designed. The singer designed. Yeah. He's a like big time like graphic designer.
Yep.
And so I think he had a lot to do with that aesthetic and also pulling from and trying to further the, in my opinion, the whole like kind of Black Flag critique of like using a lot of like the 1950s American imagery and stuff and like using it ironically.
But I don't think I would take any of the band's stuff as, you know, very like slapdash and non-intentional. So it's just, like,
very intentional.
Very, very interesting. Very like looking at this cover and like just staring at it, and, like thinking about like kind of the intent there, and then again with that like very like ominous sort of title for this record too.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say that's the Protestant, like just the bare stripness of like Protestantism. That's like it, you know.
I read apparently that this is from some sort of shrine or something like that. It's like partly from photography of like a shrine. So I was like, that makes a lot of sense. But like, I was looking at the record and being like, if I didn't know what this sounded like, what would I think it would sound like?
Oh, you mean just like
if I just found it in a record store and had no idea?
I'd probably put it back.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know what the hell it is. I'd be like,
I think I would be interested. But I wrote that like I would probably, I had a few different things that I thought this could sound like. One was Caius. I was like, I could see it being like a stoner rock record.
Yeah, with the like the purples and the blues, it has like a very kind of like acidy kind of.
The other one is I was like a post-metal sludge band like Neurosis, you know, like not Neurosis wouldn't do this cover, but a Neurosis type band might do it.
I think also like I think
definitely sludgy.
I think perhaps I'm not being fair either, in that like I said I would put it back because I'm also not looking at the time context too of like what kind of album art was coming out at that time and what they were drawing from, and I think I need to give a closer lens to that.
Well, I have a funny one that I go from this, because like sometimes, like I was saying with Skin Culture, where I'm like haunted by that riff and I want to figure out where the fuck I feel like I'm hearing something similar. I kept looking at this cover and being like, this reminds me of something from that same era, and I cannot figure out what the fuck it is. And then I kept looking at it and I kept thinking about it because I wanted to pinpoint it so fucking badly, and I think I figured out what it was.
Okay.
And I was like, why do I feel like Soundgarden has a record that looks just like this? And in fact, The Bad Motor Finger 1991 record cover has like a mandala looking thing on the front. It's like the same fucking purple. Like, you know, it like, dude, so do I think they got it from Soundgarden? No. But
No, Keith would be very, very upset, I think, if you said that. Based on what we were talking about earlier.
But I was trying to figure out.
Hey, let me give
the
Pat a
fuck
call.
I was trying to figure out what was haunting me. That I was like, why do I feel like there's another early '90s record?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's 1991's Bad Motor Finger by Soundgarden. So
You could say that about a lot of the grunge stuff and stuff around that time anyway. I mean, you look at that and you could even say, like, just color scheme. I'm not even going for the design, but, like, Dinosaur Jr. You know, that kind of, like...
And obviously you get that feeling like it's not the right purple, but obviously you think of fucking Black Sabbath, Paranoid, you know?
Right.
It's not the correct purple, but, like, you get that same idea. I mean, it's that purple's closer to the Dissection purple.
Right up there. Yeah.
Which is also the Emperor purple, but I mean,
right.
Black metal bands
Devil Master purple.
Purple.
You know.
But
dude, honestly, I love when black metal bands use purple. Not gonna lie. It just works.
Down with blue. Up with
Yeah. It's an underutilized color.
Yeah.
But
so I guess any last thoughts? Because for me, that was kind of the last thoughts I had on it.
I mean, as far as this record goes, yeah, I mean, I pretty much don't have anything else to say at the moment on it. I'm not going to trail off into, you know, I could sit here and shoot another couple hours on Dead Guy and Kiss It Goodbye, but...
which we probably should do in the future. But
yeah.
we'll tackle those, like, I mean, hell, maybe even if we feel like it, we'll go back to earlier Rorschach stuff. But I think this was a really good record to start on, for sure.
Absolutely.
So
it's definitely interesting that we can talk, and I love that we can talk longer than the length of the record about the record. Right?
We've probably spun the record about 5 or 6 or 7 times by now.
A 35-minute record.
I don't even know how long we've been talking, to be honest with you.
Yeah, so
it's definitely been like a few hours.
Yeah.
Fuck.
But so given that this is our first episode of the podcast, though, there's something I wanted to kind of set forth as a kind of way of going, and this could be super brief if anybody wants to kind of talk a little bit, but I thought each of the three of us kind of just something completely unrelated, but something that we are currently just kind of vibing on, really, really digging. That could be visual art stuff. It could be something we're reading, something we're listening to, you know, and I figured everybody could spit out 3 things that maybe we want to turn anybody out there onto. We're kind of vibing about. You can reach out to us over social media and just tell us, like, hey, man, that shit sucks. You got fucking garbage taste. Why the fuck are you into that stuff? But
let us know.
So, you know, you could send us death threats, like, dude, if you don't stop watching that shit.
Any and all criticism.
Yeah. Or
I mean, praise, or trying to make friends, or
if you also have bad taste, let us know. You know?
Yeah, come hang out with us.
But yeah, Jason, I say you start, dude. Like, what's like 3 things you've really been vibing on?
I would say I just got. Well, I'm going through this book by this anonymous writer that, like, goes by New Juice.
Okay.
Juche. And it's, like, going through... It almost reads like a weird travelogue thing of him in, like, somewhere in Asia just fucking being debaucherous. Like, he just gets up, goes out, tries to come as many times as he can a day in all different type of fucking situations. It's fucked up, and it's like, it seems like he's the writer right now where it's like, get the books now before they reach a point where these motherfuckers are sold out and they're gonna be like fucking $300 a pop.
I can see why you'd want to be an anonymous writer writing this story, though.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's filthy. It's filthy, but it's elegant. It's like there's nothing in it that's worth quoting until, like, out of nowhere you get, like, a little line where it's like some philosophical shit. And it's like, okay,
that sounds very Desaad.
Yeah.
Filthy but elegant?
Absolutely, yeah.
That sounds very Desaad.
Is it available on, like, Amazon?
Yeah. I've been reading the book Mountainhead from him. Okay. That one is on Amazon.
Yeah, so. I'm just curious, like, how accessible this stuff is. Like you're saying, it's pretty, you know, limited.
Yeah.
So, you know.
That one is, then also listening to the Holocaust record over and over again, which you put me on to.
Yeah, that's produced by Blue Sky Black Death. This
Yeah.
guy Holocaust to us goes by War Cloud.
Mm-hmm.
You know, really good stuff.
That one bugged out, and then also like Killer Army, like the Wu-Tang affiliate. So their 2 albums, and then I finally listened to one of the greatest hits they put together, which just like mashes the the 2 first albums fucking perfectly, you know. But like that band and their like militant esoterics it's absolutely like it's just fucking great. It's like it's the whole like hip hop shadow boxing jihad shit that they just do like to the absolute like perfect degree. So those are the 3 things.
Cool.
Fucking now.
Fuck yeah, dude. That's I should go back and revisit some Killer Army shit.
Yeah, right.
I was listening to some RZA stuff, which I've been the biggest RZA fan forever. So like I've been revisiting some of that stuff lately. So, Anthony, what do you got?
Oh man. So as far as reading, I had a conversation with a friend. I've actually been I ordered another book. It's about I guess Christian Gnosticism. And I feel like a lot of the contemporary stuff that I've read is a lot of like Elaine Pagels.
Okay.
And my friend recommended me something from a bit of an older lens, so I'm very curious to kind of like sort of check that out. And also this particular friend also did a lot of he does a lot of traveling to the east and stuff like that. He's actually, I believe he's in India right now, and he just kind of like stays there for months on end, stuff, just like, you know, like hikes to monasteries and stuff like that. Does a lot of yoga and stuff like that. And it was very interesting hearing him, because I feel like he's sort of undid his sort of like Western lens a little bit, as far as like kind of like occultism goes and stuff too. And he's like, I was really into like a lot of Gnosticism and stuff like that. And he's like, but since being here and being in this new culture and stuff like that, I have kind of bit of a dull taste for it. And he actually recommended me like kind of like a few books. So I'm curious to see an alternate lens kind of like on Gnosticism, because that's something that's sort of like you know, big in my life. Not that I consider myself a Gnostic or anything like that, but that's just something I like to read a lot of. I look at everything with at least like half of a secular lens. That's just how I read a lot of these texts. So that's something that I'm reading. Something that I'm listening to is and I slept on this for a long time, is Swans, actually. And I started with Soundtracks to the Blind.
Okay.
And Love of Life.
Right on.
I listened to Love of Life as I was falling asleep for about 2 hours with headphones on in the dark. And it's fucking incredible.
See, that's one of the few records from them that I haven't spent much time with.
Oh, man. That's... So I went down a whole list, and I sort of vetted, like, which one should I start with, like, kind of first? Because, like, I'm just, like... I think I've made fun of Swans fans for years, being like, yeah, this is just stuff that has its head up its own ass. No, it's actually really fucking good. It's actually really fucking good, and I think I have, like, a whole catalog of stuff that I'm now extremely interested in checking out. And, like, that's a whole jump-off point into so many different things. I actually haven't checked out the earliest stuff, which is, like, Filth, which I guess would be more like, kind of like... more like a Godflesh kind of...
Yeah, 100. It fits right in with the Godflesh type of stuff.
Which, like, I'm already familiar with, like, Street Cleaner and stuff like that. And, like,
I would say it's closer to, like, the Godflesh self-titled, though.
Okay.
It's, like, a little bit more primitive like that and a little less atmospheric.
I'm really, really interested in, like, sort of, like, taking that sort of journey and, like, kind of, like, looking and, like, listening through, like, all the stuff and really, really taking the time to digest it. I think I got intimidated by... kind of Swans in the same way I got intimidated by Godflesh, because their fucking catalog is massive.
Yeah.
And that's not something that you listen to in one night. This is, even though I did.
I mean, even just their new trilogy, I mean, that would eat up an entire night.
Oh, sure.
You know,
and it's something we're going to have to revisit and really pick apart. Yeah. And, I mean, that's just something that is just so massive. And I almost look at it, it's the first time that I think I'm diving into something, and I feel like it's more like, I'm not just listening to a record from a band. It's like, it's almost like reading a fucking book, or like a trilogy of books, or like a saga of books, or an encyclopedia of books. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of like where I'm at right now. How about yourself?
I've been getting back into reading. Like, I've been obsessed with like Eastern comics for a good while now.
Okay.
So I've been trying to dip my toes back into Western comics. Todd McFarlane, which Spawn was like my favorite growing up, restarted 3 different Spawn series. I'm kind of really just reading King Spawn.
Okay.
So started reading that. I have been watching the 1999 Hunter x Hunter anime.
Okay. Sick.
Which I've already seen the 2011, and honestly, I'm liking it better because it's way grittier, way fucking darker.
Something about 90s. Me and my friend Ellie say this all the time because we have a very similar taste in anime. It's late 80s to the 90s is like. Yep. That's where you want.
I'm already a huge fan of like Yu Yu Hakusho and stuff like that. And it's like totally got that kind of vibe.
Something about the time period.
So yeah, I mean, I think that the 2011 has its strengths, and I think it appeals to more people. Like I think your average person, but if you're into darker, more grittier stuff, like the 1999 version is definitely going to have more of that. It's a little bit more. I don't want to say disturbing, but it's got scenes that are definitely a little bit more horrific than the version that's a little brighter in 2011.
Yeah, you get away with a lot more then too, even with like all the OVAs they had back then too. Like,
yeah,
they were all like pretty gruesome.
You could show the same. Shit. You could show the same scene with like a little bit more blood and a little bit more like
or like Wicked City.
Yeah,
so
like, absolutely.
Is it like not that. As shonen, or is it like still like shonen, but like just a little bit more?
Well, I think Hunter x Hunter as a series kind of like plays with and almost perverts the whole shonen tropes, and then also I think it kind of like toes that line between shonen and seinen. You know, where it's like at a lot of points, especially like the arc I'm at right now, which is my favorite, the York New arc. That one is very much like toes the line between seinen and shonen. And then something I've been listening to for a while now, I've been like diving into the old Scorn catalog, which is like a lot of electronic music by Mick Harris after he left Napalm Death.
Okay.
Justin Broderick was in the band early on, and then after the first like 2 or 3 records, basically it just became Mick Harris, and he was just doing like DJ stuff. It gets a lot of like hip hop instrumentals that are all like darker and industrial. Eventually he gets super into dub music, and then over time he kind of like was really early and influential in almost creating dubstep music. Like, you know, you listen to this stuff and it sounds like modern dubstep, but if you look at the dates, it's like 6-7 years too early. You know, it's like pretty cool, and you're like, this is the fucking original drummer of Napalm Death. It's just insane when you look at like the early lineup of Napalm Death and see what these people were able to do, whether that be Lee Dorian going and starting Cathedral, Justin Broderick doing Godflesh, and, you know, Carcass and all this, and then Scorn, like, you know, literally, you know, Mick Harris going on and you know, basically inventing or pioneering dubstep in, you know, this like dark, very like metal influenced sort of way, but like, you know, and then dipping his toes into dub music when nobody was doing that, like, and obviously listening to things like Lee Perry and, you know, shit like that. It's really cool. Like, so I definitely they have a record called Evanescence, probably where most people would want to start. Yeah, just like any one of the Scorn records, if you don't like a particular time, go 2 or 3 records back in any direction and you'll get a totally different sound. But I think he's put out at least a few dozen records under that project name over the years.
Yeah.
Which is fucking pretty cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
So
now I'm kind of actually interested in checking out new Spawn shit. Like, is the like current?
Yeah, it's only like 12 or 13 issues in.
Oh damn!
Oh,
okay, that's
There's
good.
King Spawn. I think it's called Scarlet, I think is the other one. That one I'm not reading at all because like the artwork doesn't really appeal to me. It's a little too like classic Marvel looking.
Okay, I got you. Yeah.
King Spawn's a little grittier and cool looking, and I think that's kind of the one they're mainly concentrating on. So I went with that one, and then there's Gunslinger Spawn, which is like an old west, and it's like super gritty and dirty. So I only picked up the first issue of that one, but I got the first 5 of King Spawn, and I'm still kind of digesting those, but I'm gonna get caught up real soon.
Nice.
So
hell yeah,
it's worth it, you know. And I mean, if anybody hasn't seen Hunter x Hunter, like both versions are worth checking out. The manga's good, so you know. Fuck yeah.
Nice. There we go.
Thank you, everybody. Hopefully you made it this far. Until the next one, if anybody's got critiques, suggestions, fucking wants to send us hate mail, death threats, all that kind of stuff, completely open. We'll definitely put in the show notes, so whenever you guys are watching this, we'll put plenty of information on where to find all 3 of us. We might make a social media profile or something like that for all this stuff. We'll see how it goes. But I had fun doing this project. Hopefully you guys enjoyed.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Yeah,
if you've made it this far.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Peace.
Be well.